Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Moore. Here. Alderwoman Murphy.
Here.
Alderman Kotar. Here. Alderwoman Boyd.
Here.
Alderman Bosley. Alderwoman Martin.
Present.
Alderman Boyd.
Present. Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. And thank everybody for your patience. We have 2 meetings going on at the same time, and some members are on both committees, so we have to make a quorum and just delay just a little bit. So I appreciate your patience. We're going to take up some bills that shouldn't take a lot of time real quick. We're going to take up Board Bill 131, sponsored by Alderwoman Marlene Davis. She's not here. She asked me to handle her bill for. It's an honorary street naming for Elder Bennie Lee Thompson. It will be at the intersection of Sheridan Avenue and Webster Avenue and run east on Sheridan north to North Garrison Avenue. And Elder Thompson has been a pillar of the community for quite some time, and this is a way to honor him and provide a legacy. And I will take questions from any member of the committee, starting with Alderman Moore.
No questions.
Alderwoman Murphy.
No questions.
Alderman Kotar.
No questions.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Martin.
No questions.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to pass Board Bill 131 out of committee with a due pass recommendation. It's been moved in second. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Conway. Alderman Moore. Alderwoman Murphy.
Aye.
Alderman Kotar.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderman Bosley. Alderwoman Martin.
Aye.
Alderman Boyd.
Aye. Okay, Board Bill 131 comes out of committee with due pass recommendation. Next board bill is Board Bill 133, sponsored by Alderwoman Sarah Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is as we say, pretty simple piece of legislation. Basically, it's almost like a gravel road between these 2 properties, and she wants to consolidate her property. It's in, if you're familiar with the area, South Broadway, almost like an industrial area, and neighborhood butts up to that.
Now, what are we doing exactly?
We're just vacating an alley.
Okay. And
It's not really even an alley. It's almost like a little gravel. It's sort of the alley runs out. It's just like a little gravel portion behind or between 2 pieces of property.
the owner owns all the property? Around
Yes.
it? Okay. Okay, Alderman Moore.
Is it through traffic? Can you,
It will stay open for emergency purposes, but there's no real through traffic there or any city services.
will you pave it?
No, sir.
Don't leave it like that.
Yes, sir.
Gravel.
Yes.
In your ward?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Alderwoman Murphy.
Yes, is refuge fine with this?
Yes.
And everything? Okay, thank you, that's all.
Alderman Kotar.
No questions.
Alderwoman Boyd.
No questions.
I have no questions. I'll entertain a motion to pass Board Bill 133 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Previous roll.
Been moved in second. Hearing no objection to previous roll, Board Bill 133 comes out of committee with due pass recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay, next board bill is Board Bill 129, sponsored by Alderman Vaccaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. So last week was the first reading of this in committee. And things that we found out, and I know that we asked that the carriage people and other people come. I did get something from Melba Moore, although she's absolutely for this board bill of banning them.
I'm sorry, from who?
From Melba Moore, the health, but she's got someone here. We did send something out. Now, in last week's, just as a refresher, and for those that were not here, one of the things the health department told us was, even on those hot days last week when we were breaking records, And although they're not supposed to have the horses out in 92-degree weather or above, they were out. And when the health department tried to enforce it, they were told to ignore it and to ignore them. And the horses continued even though the temperature was well above the recommended temperature, what they want. This started originally, just as a background, when a horse, earlier 6 months ago in St. Charles, a horse ran into the river with a carriage on it and drowned. You go back about 6 or 8 weeks ago, a horse went running down the riverfront with a lady and a 4-year-old child happened to jump out of it. And I guess eventually the horse wrecked into something, but could have been like way worse. I was on the news, on Channel 2 News in that time, saying we need to have some regulations. Well, someone called me, I assume a carriage company, telling me that, first off, they're regulated by the Taxi Commission, which apparently there's lawsuits, so they're not regulated by anybody. But what they did tell me is that they have enough regulations. I need to leave them alone, and I need to regulate all the corrupt politicians here at the Board of Aldermen. So that's when I found and figured out that there's no cooperation. And so what I did find is, yeah, we can't regulate them, but we can ban horses, mules, and anything else on the city streets. So what this board bill proposes to do is ban horses, and it affects the carriage companies, and out of fairness to them, they're here, and of course the chairman asked me to email everybody, which we did. So I'm open for questions. If not, I would just say we'll listen to all the testimony.
Okay, I'll ask the committee if they have any questions of you at this time, then we'll open it up for public comment. Alderman Moore?
Yes. I don't particularly like horses. I guess because they never came up in the neighborhood out there, and I was beaten, tired, pushing schools. But I feel sorry for the horses that are walking through the street. They look depressed, and I worry about them all the time, just wondering what is going on with them. And what's the thought process of having that horse walk down that hot street on that hot pavement with those horseshoes? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You always take care of me.
Well, and I agree with what you're saying, and not only the runaway horses, I was surprised at the amount of people that on city streets downtown that said, you know, the horses urinate, and unless it rains every 2 or 3 days, the smell is bad from the urination because they don't
Now,
have
surely that one incident with the horse running down the street didn't change your mind, did it? Is that why this?
No, there was actually one dropped dead in Tillis Park. One ran into the river and drowned. One went and ran. But what put this on my mind was when I said we need to do some regulation where someone's in control of the horse at all times, I was basically told to shove it. So I put this bill together because I want to see them pull that if they can't have a horse to pull it or a mule. So this is an answer to their answer, or to at least the phone call I got. What I did find out is the board bill is extremely popular in the sense that I got emails from people downtown, I got from all over saying about the urination smell, about exactly what you're saying, that it's hard for them horses to walk on cobblestones. So I got more calls. I think I received probably 4 or 5 emails saying that they like them, and probably between 60 and 70 telling me don't regulate them, ban them. So, I mean, we have a lot to think about. But I agree with everything you're saying. I like horses. I don't like the fact that there's no regulation, in the sense that right now there's a lawsuit between them and the Taxi Commission. So I feel that right now there's no regulation. And then if in the last week's meeting, they ignore, according to the health department, the simplest of regulations, asking them not to be out there on those days that are hot.
And we strengthen the regulations and make them more enforceable, or they're not being enforced? Who's the enforcer on this? The health department?
Nobody. The answer is nobody. The answer is supposed to be the taxi commissions, but they're being sued, and so nobody. And the health department is trying to regulate it, but all they can do is send a letter to the taxi commission, because according to the health department, and I'm sure they'll be up here to speak for themselves, according to the health department in the last meeting, they went out and told them, look, it's 90 whatever degrees, you're not supposed to be out here. And they were told, the drivers were told by the companies, or at least the ones who were out there, ignore the health department, there's nothing they can do about it. And so it was asked at that meeting, well, what can you do? And the answer is, there's nothing we can do about it.
Who would be the regulator? Can we make them the regulator? Can we appoint that to them? Assign it to their
You know,
department?
right now, because there are rides for, like a taxi, for hire, the taxi commission regulates them. But they're also suing the taxi commission, so there is no regulation at the minute.
Who's suing the taxi regulator?
The carriage people. And again, they'll be up here to talk for themselves. And these are all good questions for people that are a lot more knowledgeable than me.
Have they decided to sue us yet?
We can regulate our streets. In other words, we can say that, we put bike lanes in. We can regulate our streets. We can say that you can't put a dragster on the street. We can put speed limit signs on the street. We cannot regulate the carriage companies.
What would be the difference in Tower Grove having horses and downtown having horses? A short route?
No, so in the bill, horses in parades, horses in parks, like if it's in Tower Grove Park, there are some exceptions where horses can be done. If it's in a park, you can have horses. If the police officers choose to have horses, if there's a parade and the Clydesdales are in them, or not just a Clydesdale, but there's a parade, you can have horses if they're in a parade. So they're not completely banned. They're banned for every day just being out there.
That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Alderwoman Murphy,
No questions at this time. I'm going to wait for the testimony.
Alderman Kotar,
No question this time. I'll wait to hear from the members of the public.
Alderwoman Boyd,
No questions this time. I'll wait for the testimonies.
Alderwoman Martin.
No questions either. I'll wait. Thank you.
Okay. Let me ask this. I want to see if we can get the industries first. Is there anyone here from the Taxi Commission? Okay. What are we waiting for?
What's that?
I thought you asked me to wait for
No.
something. Is there anyone here representing the Taxi Commission? No one is here representing the Taxi Commission. Alderman Vaccaro,
Yes.
was the Taxi Commission invited to this hearing?
I sent something to, I believe, the Taxi Commission. I couldn't swear to that one. I know for sure we sent it to Kitty Radcliffe. I know it was whatever you'd asked me for. All four carriage companies and the health department. Them I know for a fact.
Is there anyone here representing the CVC?
And she did get something. So if she chose not to come, I don't know. But
Okay.
Kitty Radcliffe did get a email, again, as well as the four different carriage companies and the health department. I did get a response from the health department from Melba, who said she's having an alarm put on her house today and cannot make it, but she would have representatives here.
Okay. Is there anyone here representing the carriage company as a body, as a whole? Okay.
Individually.
Yeah.
Individually is fine. I just wanted to know if there was a lobbyist, someone that was speaking on behalf of the whole.
Yeah, we have all four companies here.
There is someone speaking on behalf of the industry.
Yes.
Okay. Have you signed up? I have. Okay, would you come up forward, please?
I also have copies for all of you, my testimony, if you like,
Okay.
and additional information.
So tell us your name, and who you're representing.
My name is Mindy Patterson, and I am president and co-founder of the Cavalry Group. We are a private member-based company.
Would you pull the microphone up, please?
Yes, sorry. We are a private member-based company nationwide representing animal owners and animal enterprise.
Okay.
For the last 6.5 years, the Cavalry Group has been protecting the legal property and constitutional rights of our members nationwide, including horse owners, pet producers, exotic animal owners, trainers and exhibitors, and farmers and ranchers. I have personally been a part of the horse community and the industry my entire life. We take animal welfare very seriously, and we demand the highest degree of care of animals from all of our members. The reason for the founding of the Cavalry Group is that across America today, our rights to own and raise animals are under attack by animal rights extremists and their increased influence on government agencies which oversee issues pertaining to regulation and permitting of animal-related businesses. Recently, these groups have pushed for unsupported regulatory changes or bans in other states and cities to achieve their goals. These regulations often mislead legislators, committee members, and the general public as to their actual effects and true impact on animal owners, breeders, and consumers. Instead of using actual facts and science, the activists prey on emotions to influence legislators and city and county council members using pictures and videos taken vastly out of context. The following are my points in opposition to Board Bill 129. The anti-carriage movement is largely spearheaded by organizations pushing an animal rights agenda, which is an ideology based on emotion, not science and facts, and advocates that animals are equal to humans. Urban working horses have lived among people in cities for hundreds of years. It is what they are bred to do. A ban as the result of operator error in the carriage industry is not the answer. Enforcing regulations is one thing. Banning an industry outright is wrong, unfair, and, quite frankly, is an attack on small business and tourism in the city of St. Louis. I know many people across the country who we have hosted as guests in the city of St. Louis who we've treated to a carriage ride in downtown so they can see the wonderful landmarks in the city of St. Louis. It is a memory that they cherish. All of the emotional arguments that you will hear or have heard opposing the horse carriage industry are presenting emotional rhetoric and tend to convince you that carriage operators, even those who happen to be abiding by the law, are animal abusers. The proponents of the carriage ban have made claims of horse deaths and accidents in the city of St. Louis, some without any factual proof, and they've made representations stating that the carriage companies have no intention of complying with regulations. How would they know what their intentions are? How would they know their intentions? Furthermore, those advocating in favor of a carriage ban have testified about carriage accidents that aren't even from the city of St. Louis. But consider in comparison these facts, that the city of St. Louis had 32 auto accidents in just the last 30 days. So are we going to ban cars in the city of St. Louis? And in 2014, there were 7 pedestrians who were killed in the city of St. Louis by automobiles. Are we going to ban pedestrians from walking in the city limits? A horse carriage ban is telling the rest of the country that you are allowing people with an animal abolition agenda to influence you. If the carriages are banned from St. Louis, an injustice will be done to legitimate businesses and to animals that can never be undone. There is no such thing as a temporary ban. People who decide the fate for these animals and their owners and these businesses, at the very least, should be required to know something about them. None of this is justification for banning horse carriages. I respectfully request that you reject Board Bill 129, which would impose a ban on horse carriages in the city of St. Louis. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Alderman Moore, you have any questions?
Yes. I resent the fact that you say that the legislators are being, as a legislator, is being influenced by somebody that's concerned or not concerned about horses. I haven't been lobbied, we are normally lobbied by anybody. If somebody was calling me and tell me to lobby me about a horse, I tell them to go to hay.
I'm sorry that you are resentful of that, sir, but nationwide, there are legislators who are being influenced by the animal rights propaganda.
Terms, some legislators, not all legislators are involved in that type of,
I stand corrected.
thank you.
Alderwoman Murphy.
Yes, I heard you. I said, I guess my concern is the not following the regulations that are in there as far as the heat, the temperature of the day and whatnot. And we have facts about that. I don't know about scientific, but we do have, pictures and whatnot that show that the animals were out when it was too hot, and they took up the whole length of the street, the whole width of the street, I'm sorry. We had a statement from police officers that said they just completely ignored their orders. So we do have some facts to go by. And I'm concerned about the fact that they are not regulated by someone on a regular basis. If you cared about the animals so much, it seems that you would regulate yourself. And I always just tell my students that what you do when no one's looking is a sign of character. And I worry that the carriage industry downtown doesn't show that on a regular basis. That's my concern.
These are business owners that it is in their very best interest to care about their animals and their businesses. It is my understanding that this is an issue of enforcement. Who's in charge of enforcing these regulations that are already in existence?
Well, I would think they would do it with or without the enforcement, that they would, if they cared about the animals, they would follow the regulations or have their own. It was my point, that it wouldn't even matter to them that someone gave them a ticket or not, that they would simply just follow the regulations that they
Correct.
set out for their animals' welfare.
But is it really worth banning an entire industry?
If the, yes, if the regulations are constantly ignored, and then I think maybe we do have to start over, is my point. Yes.
I believe it's an enforcement issue, not a matter of regulations, and perhaps it's time to revisit the regulatory procedures overseeing the carriage industry before completely banning a legitimate industry that is a tremendous part of your economic system and here in St. Louis, your travel industry. That's what I was looking for. Any other questions?
Okay. Alderman Coder.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Ms. Patterson, right?
Yes.
So you just touched on something that I'm hoping we can talk about more with the carriage company owners. So do you represent the various carriage companies?
I do.
Are they all members of your organization?
Not all.
Okay. If I could, Mr. Chairman, could I have a show of hands, carriage companies that are members of the Cavalry Group? Would you mind raising your hands? Okay, I see two it looks like.
Three.
Okay, three. Okay, so you're here speaking on behalf of the two groups that are members of your organization,
That is
right?
correct. And actually, I'm speaking on behalf of the entire industry nationwide.
Good.
Because if it happens here,
Thanks, ma'am. I'm going to ask some questions, all right? Okay, thanks. So my next question was, you talked about regulations. So would your members be open to, I guess, regulations regarding what times they can operate?
I believe so.
Okay. Some regulations relating to temperature that the animals can operate under?
That is my understanding.
Okay. I guess insurance requirements, would they be willing to abide by certain insurance requirements?
I would prefer that the carriage companies themselves answer those questions.
Okay. So you can't answer those questions?
I would prefer not to, but it's
All right.
that's not our job.
So, okay, but you're representing the carriage companies, but you can't speak to those various questions about what regulations they'd be willing to follow and which ones they won't?
I'm not representing them legally in terms of any sort of legal hearing, but it is our job to represent their constitutional rights to operate.
Great, okay, nothing further. Thank you, Chairman.
Alderwoman Boyd.
I'm not like Alderman Moore. I love horses, okay?
So do I.
And so I do feel that horses, because I heard you say loud and clear, we expect you to treat them as humans. Well, they have hearts, And so I'm looking at them as a human. They have feelings. They might be an animal, but they have feelings like everybody else. So I guess my question is, who regulates the carriage companies on the care of the animals? What are they going by? What laws are they going by?
It's my understanding we're here today to discuss the regulations overseeing the carriage industry in City of St. Louis. As far as the care of horses within the carriage industry, I mean, there's already a framework overseeing that. And that was my question earlier. Who is overseeing the regulatory, who has oversight over the industry in the City of St. Louis?
So I guess what my concern is, and I'm with Alderman Murphy, is I don't see where nobody's being held accountable, and I don't see the carriage companies as holding themselves accountable for these animals because they can't do it for themselves. And so if it's one incident of a horse dying or in the heat, that's one too many to me. And so I'm back again asking, how are the carriage companies going to look at enforcing or making sure these animals are taken care of? Because I'm pretty sure the mounted police take care of their horses and they make sure they're okay. We know the Clydesdales are taken care of very well. And so I look at the horses that these people are investing in should be treated on the same level because they are in the business of making money. And so this is their product that they need to make sure that they take care of. So what I'm hearing is nobody's holding them accountable, and then they don't feel that they should be accountable to anyone because they're not following any rules or regulations. Am I hearing correctly, or is it something I'm missing?
It is my understanding that the points that you have brought up are operator error. And accordingly, if that is the case, that is not reason to outright ban an industry. And it is up to the regulatory or enforcement arm within the City of St. Louis to oversee the regulations.
So who is that?
That was my earlier question.
So they're not accountable to anybody, that's what you're saying. The carriage companies are not accountable to anyone. So they can kind of do...
Well, it used to be the health department that was overseeing the industry.
And so what
And that has
Alderman
changed.
Bakar is saying, that they're not accountable to them anymore because they ignore their recommendations. So they need to be accountable to someone. That's my concern.
Well, I think that's the issue. And the answer is not to ban an entire industry that is a very vital part of tourism in downtown St. Louis. You just don't ban an industry that, you know, the ball has been dropped in terms of enforcement in downtown St. Louis. I think that's what needs to be looked at instead of completely outright banning an industry. It is a very vital part of the St. Louis economy, bringing tourism and people to St. Louis. Do you really want to ban that?
So do you really want to keep having incidents where we are abusing animals at high temperatures, people not handling, like you said, it's the person that was driving the carriage that didn't handle, the operator didn't handle it correctly. So do you really want to, so I'm looking at Alderman Bakari saying, we need to do something about this because this is not right with what's going on. And so you're saying, no, don't ban them. But what are you saying? So what are we going to do?
Well, first of all, the examples that you all have brought up today are circumstances that may be considered issues where there should have been oversight.
So now you don't have oversight with the
But
carriage company.
but I'm just saying that if there's oversight within the industry, but if there's operator error, or it's also my understanding that the temperature guidelines are vague. I mean, is there a specific line that is drawn for that? I am not sure of that fact, and
Ma'am,
I'll have to...
It's your understanding. There's regulations from the health department on the book. You keep saying it's your understanding. You're up here as the representative of various companies. there's a clear regulation, and one of the things we should probably be talking about and hearing from the carriage companies is whether or not 93 degrees is the appropriate temperature or something higher. We quit saying it's your understanding when there's clearly a regulation promulgated by the health department on the books about the temperature.
Is 93 the temperature? Okay, 93 is the temperature. It is a new temperature.
They told us it was 93.
So it's been changed.
Okay, excuse me, we want to just kind of come back to order. We'll have the someone from the health department come up and give us exactly what that temperature and that regulation is, because they're the ones that enforce that. So are there any more questions, Alderwoman Boyd?
No.
Okay. Alderwoman Martin.
Thank you. Thanks for coming today. I have a couple questions. One, I asked this last week, and no one has answered this, but other cities have horse carriages. Like you go to Charleston, South Carolina, it's a huge thing. Everyone does the carriage rides. Do you know who regulate, what some other ideas of regulatory bodies in other cities, like Charleston, for instance?
There's always a regulatory arm. It varies from city to city. In New York City, they have their own regulatory department. It varies from city to city. Sometimes and oftentimes it's the health department or the transportation department.
Okay.
In New York City, it's the transportation department.
Okay.
Because each carriage has a medallion, no different than a taxi cab.
Okay.
So it's the transportation department that oversees the regulations.
Okay, thank you. I think we're kind of hemming and hawing over this, but what we need, for those of us who may not want to do a ban, you have to have an association, or however you all want to form an organization, has to come to the table saying, okay, we have some ideas on who could regulate us, and then those entities would have to agree to it, because right now the taxi cab commission doesn't want to regulate. The health department is saying that the carriage owners are being difficult or not coming into compliance. I'm not trying to put words in someone's mouth, but that's kind of how I understand it. So there has to be some sort of compromise and willingness to comply with regulation, and also who is going to regulate you. We have to have regulation. I mean, that's just necessary. So I think that's what we're looking for, not really getting, if that makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
And I would agree with you on that.
Okay. Because if there's not some entity that, if there's not somebody that wants to regulate, then I don't know, then anyone could operate. I could get a horse and operate.
Well, what shouldn't be happening is having these animal rights groups do the regulating. And basically that's what's happening is we've got these groups that know nothing about horse care. I mean, they care about horses, but they really know nothing about animal husbandry, that are pressing their emotional agenda and increased influence on these bans.
And I agree. I've seen that throughout the years on a state level too.
Oh.
And I can see through some of that, but at the same time, we do have to have something in place, and and it's probably going to require carriage owners to have some sort of compromise on whether it's the temperature, hours of operation, where, when. And so that's why I was looking to see what other cities did. I know that maybe not everyone's happy with it, but
Right.
at least there's something.
I appreciate that. And as far as the temperature change goes, while I admit that I should have known of that change, apparently it's vague. And I think things need to be extremely clear when regulating any industry that is as vital to the city of St. Louis as the carriage industry is here. So,
All right, thank you.
thank you.
Alderman Vaccaro.
First off, I think the city will survive without the carriages. I don't think it's that vital. Secondly, I'm motivated by the carriage company's unwillingness to abide by. There's already rules out there that regulate when they're supposed to be on the street, yet they go anyway. There's regulations that are out there about heat, but they do it anyway. So to tell me that we could set up a bunch of regulations that they're going to ignore, the reason there's a lawsuit, I guess, with them and the taxi commission over enforcement, so they've shown their willingness to not want to comply not even when we've asked the simplest of rules. I'm not compelled by any animal lovers group. Yes, I had horses, and I did rescue horses, but I'm not compelled by that. I'm compelled by the fact that when I got a call, and I simply asked to make sure someone was on that horse in control at all times, I was told that I don't know what I'm talking about. They don't need our involvement. Stay out of it. I'm compelled by that. I'm compelled by the rudeness of the company that called me, that basically said, we're going to ignore all the regulations. There's simple ones out there right now. When the horses are supposed to be out there, the temperature. When the health department comes up, they'll tell their story that they told last week. When they were out there telling them, asking them to take the horses off the street because we're having these hotter than normal temperatures, and they're being told by these companies, ignore them. They have no clout to do anything. They can call the taxi commission, which is a joke because the carriage companies, my understanding, has the taxi commission in court, so they have no rules. As far as accidents and people being killed every day in cars, should we ban cars? We take licenses away from people every day. Get a bunch of speeding tickets. Get a DWI. We'll take your license away. No, I don't need applause for that. But to sit here and say that there's so many accidents is a bunch of BS. And it's...
Can we have some order, please? Okay, let's establish this rule. I'm sorry if I didn't say it up front. If we're going to have outbursts from the audience, we're going to have you removed. Let's be respectful. I want to do things decent and in order. If you have signed up to speak, we will call you to sign up and speak, and you will have your say. Can we all agree with that, please? I don't hear any objections, so thank you so much.
So I'll just end by saying we regulate cars. If you get a DWI, you're out. We regulate all kinds of things with drivers. So we don't do that with the carriages. So I sit here and I'm listening to what you have to say, which more and more and more wants me to ban them. I'm serious. When I started this, it was the idea to regulate and come up with some rules. Then I find out that you're unwilling to even, or the carriage companies are unwilling to even follow the simplest rules. My heart's been changing on this weekly, because at this point, when you're going to come up here and tell me, well, they all didn't happen in the city. No, the horse that drowned happened in St. Charles. Still the same problem. No one in control of those reins, which is also a rule that they ignore, because if they didn't ignore that rule, that horse wouldn't have drowned. To have a lady and her 4-year-old child have to jump out of a moving... Anyway, what you're saying is pretty indefensible, and I have no other questions.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask you this.
Yes, sir.
Is your organization in support of the current lawsuit that basically has an injunction on enforcing the rules with the taxi commission?
I know very little about the current lawsuit, so no.
Okay.
I have to
But
say no.
Is it your understanding that basically things are in limbo as far as being regulated because of the lawsuit?
Yes,
So would it be your understanding that basically no one's regulating at this time?
that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your testimony.
For your time.
The next speaker is, and please forgive me if I messed your name up, Nina Divini? Okay. And I'm going to call Pro and then Con. So
Hi there.
state your name, give us your address, please.
3127 Limp Avenue in Benton Park. That's 63118.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So just as as I heard her talking, I had many things I wanted to say, but I pulled up on my phone that North Carolina, Chicago, and New York are currently trying to ban horse-drawn carriages. We are not the only city. This is not fueled by emotions. This is fueled by fact. No one is regulating these horse-drawn carriage companies. They know that. They are breaking the rules, and they don't care. All at the expense of animals. The city of St. Louis gets no money. We do not benefit in the city of St. Louis from these companies. Period. We get no taxpayer money. you know, if you have an allotted money for tourism, can't we do something different than have horses on the streets in 100-degree weather? It is also a public safety issue. So we have to look at it from different angles. We are not the only city trying to ban horse-drawn carriages. That's all I need to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Aiden McNamara. McNamara, I'm sorry. I told you I may screw up some names. I apologize.
Fine. Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Aidan McNamara. I'm co-owner of Claddagh Carriage Company with my husband Shannon Nicholas, and we also reside in the city of St. Louis. I was invited here today by Alderman Vaccaro to speak in opposition to Bill number 129. St. Louis City has been home to horse-drawn carriages for over 30 years. The drivers and carriages provide a service to both St. Louis residents and tourists alike. Carriage drivers are well educated on the city of St. Louis. They provide directions and recommendations to visitors, tourists, and conference attendees. They gladly answer to people unfamiliar with our city, acting as ambassadors to the city of St. Louis. The drivers love their work, mainly because they are experienced horse people that love horses. Being able to earn a living doing something that they love and are passionate about is very important to our drivers. The most efficient way for me to preempt the committee's concerns would be to reply to the baseless accusations of the animal rights lobbyists. Therefore, I would like to address the two major claims that are continuously falsely projected on our industry. They are that the horse-drawn carriages are cruel to the draft horses and unnecessary, and that the industry is unsafe. Carriage industry opponents such as St. Louis Animal Rights Team publish claims about our industry continuously. Start's social media currently states, contrary to popular belief, horses do not have the strongest backs or legs. They often suffer from spinal injuries and broken ankles from dragging such heavy weight all day. They wear a lot of equipment and often get overheated. They are highly sensitive, skittish animals who are easily spooked, and loud, noisy traffic jam city streets are not a safe or comforting place for them. They often get respiratory problems from breathing in exhaust fumes all day, and open wounds and irritation from the straps on their bodies. Start cites no studies to support their published claims, no veterinary or large equine experience. Firstly, let me say that our industry is not cruel. Our draft horses are extremely well-trained horses that are well adjusted to their urban environment. The noise and bustle of traffic, construction work, and other strange sights and sounds are not at all strange to a city carriage horse. Animal rights activists portray human emotion to our horses, often asking if we would like to pull a carriage with people in it. Honestly, I would not. However, I would also not like to spend the rest of my days eating grass on a pasture. Humans are not horses, and horses are not human. For a draft horse, pulling a carriage is not cruel. The Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in Alberta, Canada, states in educational materials that draft horses were developed to carry heavy loads, pull plows and wagons, and perform other farm work. Their height and strength make these horses a source of horsepower for farming and transportation. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines draft horse as a horse adapted for or used in drawing heavy loads. All St. Louis City carriage companies employ large breed draft horses to pull carriages. As a general rule, a horse is capable of pulling about 2 to 3 times their own body weight on wheels over paved ground. The average draft horse in St. Louis City weighs about 2,000 pounds, 1 ton apiece. The typical commercial carriage used in St. Louis City weighs about 900 pounds. Even fully loaded, the carriage is quite easy for a draft horse to pull. It's the equivalent of an average person pushing a shopping cart with a few gallons of milk in it. To answer claims that the urban environment is cruel for our horses, I'm citing a study from the College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Health and Sciences in California. This recent study was published this year in the Journal of American Veterinary Medical Association. After studying a sample of New York City carriage horses over time, the study concluded that their results provide some insight into the well-being of New York City carriage horses, and concluded that these horses do not perceive their environment or daily activities as a threat. Horses may not have been made to walk on asphalt, but asphalt was made for horses to walk on. Carriage horses wear special horseshoes to protect their feet from wear and tear. They work at a walk, which is low impact. Hard, even surfaces are easier for the horses to walk on than soft, uneven ground. And carriage horses generally have fewer leg and joint problems than riding horses. The typical shift for a carriage horse is generally no more than 8 hours, usually much less. And this is already regulated by the City of St. Louis's health director. While carriage horses are more than capable of doing the easy work of pulling a carriage every single day, all St. Louis carriage horses get at least 2 days off a week, as well as months a year on a pasture. Working in harness is not cruel or abusive for a horse. The harness is a tool that helps the horse do his job easily and comfortably. People would not want to take a carriage ride with a horse that was suffering from respiratory problems or had open wounds. The complete opposite is true. Our horses are looked after to standards well above and beyond any reasonable standard of care. To address the concerns of safety of St. Louis carriage horses, I decided to use every animal industry's arch nemesis and strongest vocal opponent, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA. I have here PETA's 17-page fact sheet, incidents involving horse-drawn carriages. Not accidents, but incidents. It covers the entire mainland USA, Puerto Rico, and Canada over a period of 32 years, from December 1985 right up to September of this year. St. Louis City is listed a total of 6 times over those 32 years. 2 incidents in 2015 where on 2 separate occasions carriages were rear-ended by motorists. 2 incidents where a horse got spooked and ran with no serious harm or damage caused, once this year and another in 2015. And 2 incidents which are really unrelated that include when the previous health director became concerned over a carriage horse on a city street and an attack on a carriage driver downtown by an assailant that was arrested for horse carriage jacking and charged with 1 count each of second-degree robbery, third-degree assault, and animal abuse. Both of these incidents cannot be blamed on the carriage industry. This is not a carriage industry report. This is PETA, the most vocal opponent of the carriage industry, and all they could come up with was 6 incidents over 32 years. This is not even an incident every 5 years. 2 times carriage horses have been spooked and temporarily rent-free. That's once every 16 years. According to recent MTC records, there are currently 40 permitted carriages working the streets of St. Louis City. I respectfully submit that this is not a safety concern, actually quite the opposite, with an exemplary record of safety, training, and control. The USA was founded on a capitalist economy and a market economy. The pricing of goods and services are guided solely by the aggregate interactions of our country's individual citizens and businesses. If there was no need for carriage rides through downtown St. Louis, then basic economics would not allow for our companies to survive, and numerous drivers making a living from providing this service. And now for the difficult part of my testimony, our horses. I've spoken as a business owner, and now I want to speak as a horse owner. Our horses are our family. They're no different than our rescued dogs and our rescued cat. Quaker, Outlaw Harvey, and Dublin are loved beyond belief. To stop them from work would mean that we would simply not be able to afford to keep them. The cost of barn and pasture, rental hay, grain, beet, shoes, veterinary care, chiropractors, and medicine, it's tens of thousands of dollars a year. To stop them from working would mean taking them away from us. Where would they go and what would they do? A ban of St. Louis carriages would mean that our companies would be forced to sell their horses, perhaps even at auction with no control of where they go. Our horses would be separated from us, separated from each other, and separated from the only life that they know. Passing Bill 129 would hurt St. Louis economically. Numerous jobs would be lost, vending facilities would be left empty, tourism and custom would be lost. The carriage horses bring more joy and happiness on the thousands of rides that are never reported on. Marriage proposals, anniversaries, weddings, children's birthdays, and countless other celebratory rides are taken every day. Please do not take from the happiness of many to please the views of the extreme. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to see if there are members of the committee who would like to ask questions. Alderman Moore.
While you are very proud of your industry and your company and what you do, you know there are bad apples in every bushel.
Yes, sir.
What do you think about regulation? You think it should be regulated and enforced?
Sir, as far as I'm concerned, we've always been regulated. There are some confusion. Currently, with the temperature heats, firstly, I would just like to correct the learned alderman. It's actually 93 by the City of St. Louis's health director and 96 by the MTC. We currently do not know who is regulating us.
What do you say about the heat and the regulation? And what do you think about the temperature?
I think that the regulation of 96 and 105 heat index using Lambert Airport as the base is fair and the proper heat. There's no veterinary support to release it to 93, and the animal rights lobbyists have stopped using the courts and are now using aldermen to try and reduce the temperature to a place where carriage companies just simply cannot afford to survive. 93 degrees on St. Louis, I would respectfully say, is every single summer day.
Do you agree with the lawsuit against the Taxi Commission?
And again, I would have to say that there is 4 individual carriage companies. We are continuously, like you said, about legislators, it's not fair to say them, carriage industry, carriage people, were 4 separate companies. And also, I would like to absolutely apologize to Alderman Vaquero on behalf of the carriage people, and I would really like to know which company it was that called you.
Who would, you're talking to me.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Apologize.
Who do you think should regulate the,
To regulate us is, at the moment, it's between the Health Department and the MTC. There's a memorandum of understanding from 2015 where the city gave the MTC power to regulate our licenses and carriages, and then the city takes care of our horses. They have the power over the health.
who do you think should regulate?
I think that the MTC is probably better equipped to regulate us. We would be all in favor for the city of St. Louis to regulate us. What we would ask is that when these regulations are made, sometimes the people doing the regulation don't know the difference between a pony and a Pursuant. And so if we were invited to the table rather than the animal rights people, we might be able to help with these regulations to a level where they are safe, humane, and easily carried out by us. There's one regulation in the health department that says that flies cannot come in inside or outside of a horse barn.
That's the only one you have in question? That's all I have.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Alderwoman Murphy.
Yes, sir, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So the carriage industry, you're saying all 4, since we have 4 here in St. Louis or whatever that may be, would be willing to sit down, say with the health department, and I take your point that perhaps veterinarians should be involved with the regulations also. Why hasn't that ever happened? I don't understand why that hasn't happened. On your part, on the carriage industry's part, if we're so concerned about the welfare of
On
animals.
our part, I found out about this bill when I got home last Thursday on the news.
Okay.
So
That's all.
we don't often get told what's going on behind closed doors. Animal rights people seem to have a talk and everything, and it really is asking a vegetarian to control a meat industry. It's not fair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Alderman Coder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right, so Mr. McNamara, right now, and I get there's some confusion because the MTC had sort of stepped up, entered into an MOU with the city in terms of the regulation of your carriages. But even during that MOU and prior to that, was the health department involved? So how long has the health department been involved in regulating the horses?
The health department from the city charter has control of all animals in the city.
Okay. And so how long is this recent change in the, I guess, temperature by the health department? Prior to that, was it consistent with what the MTC was doing, the temperatures? Yes. Okay, so that change in temperature is a recent.
Yes, sir. It changed because we used to be, if it was 96 degrees by the MTC or 105 heat index measured at Lambert Airport, no carriage horse would be out in that temperature. What the health director did, and I'm not sure if it was inadvertently, said that if the temperature hits 93 on any given day, no carriage can go out for the entire day.
So if it's 85 in the morning, you can't be out?
No.
Or after dark?
No.
You can't.
We get an email at 8 o'clock in the morning, 7:30, that says it's going to hit 93 today, you cannot operate.
Okay, so do you know, so when exactly did that temperature change come into effect? That was this summer?
July 15th of this year.
Okay, and so do you know how many days from July 15th, I guess, until recently, do you know how many days of business did that impact, that change in temperature?
In St. Louis, in our heat, it pretty much impacted us all through July and August.
Okay. So were you guys out operating during those days?
We still follow the MTC rules. We did not go out in that heat, but once the temperature went back down in the evening time, we went out.
Okay. So, and I can't unfortunately pull up the docket on the existing MTC lawsuit, but is there currently, is there a stay in place from the MTC enforcing regulations? Can you speak to that?
I have knowledge of it as an attorney, but I would prefer if you ask the actual company that's involved in the lawsuit. It's one of the 4.
Okay.
What I believe it is that the MTC does not have the power from the state of Missouri to control a vehicle that does not have a taxi cab meter in it.
Right, that's the crux of the lawsuit.
Correct.
But do you know, is there currently an injunction in place preventing any enforcement by the MTC?
We've been asking that for the last year.
Okay, no, that's not clear. All right. So if we could maybe, bring this regulatory framework out of control of the MTC and back into the city. It's my understanding that prior to the MTC, the Board of Public Service was involved in regulating the horse-drawn carriage industry. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And do you know approximately how long that regulatory framework was in place?
I do not.
Okay. Would you guys be open to, working with, I guess, the city and coming up with some regulations if there were folks willing
Mr.
to
Vice
do
Chair,
that?
I can tell you that our company would be open to working with any regulation. The continuous carriage people, carriage industry, and slander that happens it affects all of us. If one bad apple happens, it affects the entire industry. To have no regulation out there and that someone can just go and buy a horse with no experience or a carriage and put it on the street would ruin our industry.
Right, because I think we can probably all agree that there's certain things that need to be regulated. The health and safety of the animals,
Correct.
health and safety of your passengers, of your drivers, your hours of operation, your areas of operation, right? And insurance requirements.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I would certainly be willing to work as the alderman for downtown, which I think is where, the horses primarily are, many of their stables are located and where many of them, most of them operate. I'm certainly willing to talk with you all and work with you all towards coming up with a regulatory framework that can hopefully accommodate the industry, but also address the concerns of animal rights groups, which are valid concerns about the health and well-being of animals.
The health and well-being of our horses, sir, is the most important thing. So.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. McNamara.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Boyd, excuse me, sir, Mr. McNamara, can you?
Sorry, Alderwoman Boyd.
After that big dissertation, you got to allow the alderman to ask you a question.
First of all, I want to encourage you because I heard the caring and compassion that you have in regards to the animals, so I'm with you on that. But Alderman Coder kind of said what I wanted to say, and that's what I've been trying to ask the questions. Why can't we just come together to try to get something in place to make sure that everybody's protected all the way around? So I kind of piggyback on what he said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Martin.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming. I have a question. You just said that the MTC said that they couldn't regulate because horse carriages don't have meters.
Yes.
That's interesting because I know up until this year, non-emergency medical transportation providers were under the MTC regulation, and they don't have meters. So I just find that very interesting. And then second, do the carriage companies pay fees to MTC? Did they pay fees to regulate them?
We do. We pay fees on carriage permits. We have stickers on the back of our carriages like medallions, like New York does too. We pay inspection fees. We pay licensing fees. Our drivers are all licensed by the MTC.
Okay. Do you know what that compares to as far as like a taxi?
I do not. I'm not familiar with taxi.
That's fine. Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question. On your drivers, are they independent contractors?
Yes, sir.
So each one has a separate business license?
I do not believe so.
Okay, you pay taxes to the city of St. Louis?
We do. We didn't this year. It was our first year operating, and we didn't make a profit.
Okay. Tell me, as far as a safety concern, here's my concern, that a driver is not on the carriage and the horse takes off. I mean, that's a horrific experience for anybody. Is that routine? Driver doesn't have to stay on the carriage?
No, sir. All drivers are supposed to keep the reins in their hands at all time.
Okay. And so what should happen in situations like that?
I believe that the horse in St. Charles that got away, that driver was fired. I believe that they should probably lose their license to drive carriages when something like that happens, and that I believe that each of the 4 carriage companies would agree not to hire any driver where that sort of thing has happened.
Okay, you don't think there should be a penalty against the carriage company? They're ultimately responsible, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you so much for your
Thank you.
presentation. Oh, I'm sorry. Alderman Bakara, I'm sorry, has a question.
I do have a couple questions, and so I know that each driver's licensed by themselves, and it's $400, which one of the companies called me and said that's too much, that it shouldn't be that much. And I would assume they don't, I mean, when you talk about the taxes that are paid in, everything that I looked at, it isn't hardly anything, if at all. I mean, each carriage, maybe $500, maybe. That, when you talked about horses, on uneven surfaces, have you walked on the cobblestones? And my other, just a question, which company are you with? Which carriage company?
Clada Carriage Company.
Which one?
Clada.
And where are you guys located?
We trailer our horses back to pasture every night. We don't keep our horses downtown. They stay on
I
the
mean,
open
when they
pasture.
go back to pasture, where's your company?
Registered
Yes.
in the city of St. Louis.
And so what address, so you use your home address as a
Correct.
home business, but the horses are brought where every night?
Dupont, Illinois, 25 minutes across the bridge.
Okay, so they basically, your company's based out of Illinois, and then you do a home occupancy waiver, in a sense, out of your house?
We rent pasture in Illinois so that our horses can go back to pasture.
Okay, and each one of your drivers are independent of you, in the sense that they all basically pay a fee to you for the use of your carriage and horse, right?
No, sir, they earn commission and tips.
So do you pay their salary?
No, they take a commission and pay us what's left over, and that's for using the carriages.
But they're independent of your company, they're independent
Correct.
drivers. Do each one of them carry insurance in case of an incident?
The companies themselves carry insurance of $1 million on each carriage.
What about the driver itself?
The driver is covered under our insurance.
Okay, and, well, anyway, that was pretty much my questions, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next speaker is Mr. Bob Baker.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Bob Baker. I'm Executive Director of the Missouri Alliance for Animal Legislation here in St. Louis, and I just want to go on record in support of this bill for our several hundred members that live in the city of St. Louis. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Oh.
I don't think we're going to ask any
Okay,
questions.
thank you.
Mr. McNamara, could you leave us a copy of your testimony? Oh, okay, I thought you were reading from a piece of paper. Sure, would you do that, please? Okay. Next person, Ted Randazza. Did I say that right? We'll see.
Hello. I'm a co-owner of American Queen Carriage Company. I'm a little short, sorry. And, okay. You know, everyone keeps talking about how we're not
I'm sorry,
regulated.
let's start over. Tell us who you're representing again. You have-
American Queen Carriage Company.
American Queen Carriage Company, okay.
We've been in business 2 years now. Everyone keeps talking about how we're not regulated. We've been regulated from day one, not knowing for sure who at the time is doing it, because we went from MTC regulating us to the health department. At the same time, MTC was handling the carriage, health department was handling the horse. So at the time, we were handling by 2 different companies. Then all of a sudden, MTC was getting sued from Brookdale Farms. They dropped us. They didn't tell us they were dropped us, but in the meantime, we were still paying fees. I have receipts from back in April when they said they weren't regulating us, but they took $1,050 licensing fees from our company. But again, they weren't regulating us. Then all of a sudden, the health department was regulating. They asked us to bring inspections from a vet, inspecting all the horses. We did that. All 4 companies abided by it. Then all of a sudden, they changed the heat temperature from 96 to 93 without telling anyone, and then all of a sudden they just wanted to email some of the companies to let us know this was going on. Last week, when this issue come up about being out on the 23rd when it was 93 degrees, I guess it was. Whenever it's projected to be 93 or more, we get an email in the morning from the health department telling us yes or no if we can go out. We did not receive one on that day. When I sent my drivers out at 10 o'clock in the morning, it was 87 degrees. We were doing a day shift because at the time the police officers stopped by and told us there was being protesters. So we were only doing a day shift. At 3:30 in the afternoon, we get a email from the health department at 3:30 in the afternoon telling us that it was going to be too hot. At that time, you know, all the drivers were working. We were only working till 5:30. So, you know, of course, we stayed out till 5:30. The health department did come by and asked us why we were out there. Not one time did they tell any of the drivers they had to go in. Matter of fact, one of our drivers is here today. She was the one that was asked, and she'll verify that she was never told to go in. So, you know, we're not opposed to regulations. We just don't know who regulates us. I know we pay fees, we pay licensing fees, we pay taxes, we pay everything that is required by the companies. We do carry insurance, which I believe one time we were told we don't carry it, but we do. In order to have a CCN license, we have to have insurance. And this is through the MTC. So, I mean, you know, the regulations, we're not opposed to that. We just want to know who is regulating us. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take some questions. And the reason the pro side, people are in support of it. We tend to not have a lot of questions because we hear that it's invaluable information. The carriage companies themselves, we tend to have more detailed questions for. So that's why you don't hear me taking questions. If you're pro, that's the only reason why. Let's see, Alderman Moore.
You say you pay $1,000 some dollars
Correct.
to who?
We paid it to MTC for our inspections for our carriages and our CCN license.
There's no brochure or a booklet with rules and regulations in it?
No, sir. The only regulation they ever get, or rules they ever gave us was, because at the time, MTC they went back and forth with their rules. Whenever someone would call in to them to complain about us, a new rule got put into place. The only rule we actually had was between 4 and 6, Monday through Friday, we were not allowed to be up in the immediate downtown area. And then we were allowed to be on the landing and on the riverfront, where there was no traffic and we didn't bother anybody. And we abided by that. There hasn't been one citation since this has started about any company being out there.
Name the people that you're paying besides the $1,000. What else are you paying?
Well, we pay our taxes to the city based on our income.
So what do you think your average
And
a
we do our
year?
business license too, sir.
So what, all that together, what does that come out to?
I don't have the facts exactly how much money it is. How much we actually pay to the city or
Overall? To be
probably
regulated?
$2,500 to $3,000 a year in fees and taxes.
And how many companies you represent?
Only one company, our company. There's 4 companies here.
Okay, that's all I have.
Some are a little bit on the smaller side, and then we have a couple larger companies.
Alderwoman Murphy.
No more questions, thank you.
Okay, Alderman Coder.
Thanks, Ted. The MTC, you pay them, talk to me about what you pay them per year. Is it $1,000 per carriage?
No, sir, it was $1,050 overall. I have the paper I can get.
That'd be great. If that's your original, we can get copies of it.
Yeah, it's the original.
Okay, we'll get a
And,
copy.
and we've done this two years in a row, and not one time have they ever come out and put our medallions on or inspected our carriages or nothing.
So but the $1,000 is supposed to, is that a fee for an inspection and a license?
It was a $500 for the CCN renewal.
The CCN is that the MTC's, is that the license that they're giving the driver?
No, it's the license to operate.
Okay, so the CCN is the license granted by the MTC to operate, so that's essentially the medallion.
Correct.
Okay. And then, in addition to that, there's an inspection of the carriage.
Correct.
For, I'm assuming, what's supposed to be basic safety, that the wheels aren't going to fall off.
Right, they check the
Okay.
lighting, make sure we have a hazard signs on them, and everything works, the lights and things like that.
And were they doing those inspections?
No.
Okay.
Only, what they do, they told us they were too busy to do it because at the time they were inspecting all the taxi cabs out at the airport. And they just gave us a runaround. Back in October of 2015, we paid our fees. Because at the time, we went from 3 carriages to 5 carriages. So we had to pay for 2 extra permits.
Okay.
They never come out. We complained about it. They said, well, don't worry about it. It's winter time. No big deal.
Okay.
Then in the spring, and all of a sudden, April 1st, we paid $1,050. And then we found out with an article from the Riverfront Times, they weren't even regulating us. But they was willing to take our money. And they was willing to send...
They cashed the check, yeah.
Yes, they did cash the check. And they were willing to send emails to every driver telling them they had to come in to do renew their license.
Right.
But then again, they weren't regulating us,
Okay.
supposedly. And then all of a sudden, the health department was, and then, I mean, we're so confused.
Right.
You know, we don't know what to do out there.
So I've got the MTC code here. Had they, and it looks like they amended the regulations regarding horse-drawn carriages back in October of 2015. Did they supply you all with copies of these? It's about 4 or 5 pages, it looks like.
No, sir.
No? Okay. Interesting.
If we don't find out anything, it's got to be through the internet.
All right.
Or through another company that might have heard about it.
And so, and on the enforcement side, have you ever seen, you know, I know the MTC has some agents that are out, you know, sort of occasionally regulating the taxis. Have your drivers ever been approached by MTC agents?
Yes, we have, and they come down and just to check, verify that each driver had a license. Now, this was back before the article come out in April.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, we haven't seen it. As a
Okay.
matter of fact, I think they reduced their whole committee down to only 3 people that even work there anymore.
Okay, so you haven't, really since this lawsuit became sort of public, you have not had any interactions really with MTC?
Not at all.
agents? Okay. And how about from the health department? How often are you guys in touch with, I guess, inspectors from the health department?
Matter of fact, not one health department. They'll drive around through the riverfront and just drive by just to kind of glance over and look at everybody, but actually stop and talk to us, not one time.
All right, and where are your
Stable?
stables? Yeah.
We're at 812 South 2nd Street.
Okay, so you're down there on, that's like Shoto's Landing area? south of
Correct.
the Arch.
We're only a couple blocks over from Brookdale Farms.
Gotcha. And has the health department ever been by there?
No, sir.
Has the MTC ever been by there?
When they were supposedly regulating, yes,
Okay.
but they won't come by and put the medallions on to inspect us. And when we talk to them, they say, well, you guys can't operate until we put the medallions on. And I said, well, when can you do this? Well, maybe a month or 2. Well, we're not going to shut our company down for a month or 2. Well, you won't put the medallions on after you took my money.
Right. And this is, and to be clear, they were there specifically regarding the carriages, not the horses themselves.
Correct.
Okay.
And at that time, the health department was supposedly, we were divided. Health department had the horses, MTC had the carriages.
Right, right.
But then again, every time MTC would never stand up for us, anytime someone call in and say, hey, we're parked in front of our building, our hotel, they would all of a sudden just call us and made another rule. Well, you guys can't be there. You know, at the time, there was no riverfront. When the riverfront was back available to us, and there's no trouble at all, nowhere.
Right. I can say, I mean, when I got elected about 2.5 years ago, we got a number of complaints about the horse-drawn carriages, where they were operating, when they were operating. The MTC got back involved. But really, since the riverfront's reopened, I can say I get far less calls and emails of folks upset about the horse-drawn carriages
And
until
another
very
thing-
recently.
Another thing you guys were talking about, you know, the carriage with a woman and a child jumped off. Well, at that time, it was our carriage company. Our driver pulled over and told all 4 that was in the carriage at the time to get off while she fixed the horse's bridle. Only 2 got off, the other 2 didn't want to get off.
Okay.
And when that happened, the horse just jogged off and the people overreacted.
All
And
right.
we do carry insurance. Every company has insurance.
And you've got $1 million policies,
Yes, sir.
right?
What was required by MTC, we had from day one. That's the only way you can have your license is you have to have a copy of your insurance.
And have you had any communications from the MTC lately about those insurance policies and the insurance requirements?
No, sir.
'Cause my understanding is they dropped it to about $225,000 for the cabs.
Just the cabs, and they dropped the cabs fees, to relicense the drivers. At our time, our drivers were roughly over $200 just to get started for our license fee. And they raised it 100 times the amount. I'm sorry, 10 times the amount.
Okay. Ted, if you don't mind, I want to do a little math. I just want to walk through so I have an understanding of these fees. So you're going to pay, right now, under the current, we'll call it a framework, even though it's sort of a hodgepodge of regulations, you're paying $500 to the MTC for the license, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And
Then you're paying-
$130 per carriage.
Then $130 per carriage, and that's for inspections?
Yes.
Per carriage.
Which the person that comes out to inspect them will tell you they know nothing about inspecting
About
the
horse-drawn
carriages.
carriages?
They just want the money.
Okay, so you've got 500, 130, then you've got a business license, right?
Correct.
What's that run you each year? Ballpark.
$200.
$200 for the business license. And that's based on number of employees and everything, okay. All right, what are your insurance premiums you get for that $1 million policy?
I just paid $1,700.
Annually?
It went up.
Okay. And how many carriages do you have?
I have permits for 5. I have 6 carriages total.
All right, you got permits for 5. I'm doing some math here. Give me 1 second.
Oh, that's fine.
Sorry. So roughly $2,500 a year in in insurance and fees to operate your 5 carriages. Does that sound right?
It sounds pretty close.
Okay. All right, and just to be clear, you guys are open to regulation. You just like a little more clarity on who's regulating you, and if you're going to be paying fees for inspections, you'd at least like an inspection?
Well, yes.
Okay.
And, like I said, the heat roll, originally the heat roll was 96, and heat index was 100.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they dropped it to 93 without telling us anything. And then, like I said, our company never found out until we talked to one of the drivers from St. Louis Carriage Company who told us this.
Right. And how often are your horses, how many horses do you have?
7.
And are those all kept at your stable
No,
now?
we keep 5 there, we take 2 home, we rotate them.
You rotate them out?
Yes.
Okay, and on a normal day, a less than 93-degree day, how many hours roughly does a horse work?
If it's less than 93,
Yeah.
we usually get out at noon on a Saturday, or by noon at least, and they'll work, usually come in around 10 or 10:30 at night.
Okay, so 10 and a half hours.
At the
a day.
only on a Saturday.
All right,
The other days are less hours.
okay. And how often are your horses, how often do they get, routine, checkups from the veterinarians?
Once a year, we get a brand new Coggins, and our horses are totally inspected, every one of them, once a year. And we have
what's a
paperwork to do.
Coggins?
They draw blood, just make sure negative or positive.
Okay, so they get blood work done once a year and I guess a visit from the vet once a year?
Correct.
Okay. And is that standard in your industry?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Nothing further.
Okay. Alderwoman Boyd.
The only thing I wanted to say, thank you for coming and giving us the information.
Oh, thank you.
Kind of enlightened us a little more. The only thing that I'm seeing is real clear is MTC is not doing what they need to be doing to support you all. And then I feel that you, the carriage companies, MTC, and the health department, and Alderman Coulter needs to get to the table to come up with what we need to be holding accountable and how we need to hold people accountable.
Correct.
Because, at the end of the day, St. Louis enjoys the carriage rides, but at the other side, as being a horse lover, I can't see us being tagged as a city that neglects or abuses our animals. And so we need to come to the table to say, okay, what's the realistic regulations that need to be applied and who's going to enforce them? And that's where I stand on it, because I keep hearing MTC, but one, I don't see anybody here from
No, they're not
MTC.
even here.
And then two, I don't see where MTC is doing what they're responsible to do to make sure that you all are following whatever guidelines they are that you don't even know about.
Well, they weren't even doing what they were supposed to do when they were regulating us. At the time, we never knew anything. They changed the rules every meeting. A new rule was put into place or something, and we didn't know nothing about it.
And so that's why I feel strongly that Alderman Coder, the Health Department, the carriage companies, and MTC come to the table to look at what we need to do to strengthen this, to make it better for the horses and for the citizens.
Yeah, we would.
Contrary to you all's belief, I look at them as humans too. So,
Yes.
I think that we need to make sure that they're taken care of.
All four companies take well care of their horses. No matter what
Okay.
people go out there and say, you will not see a cut on a horse that's on the street. If somehow, if they get a cut from maybe a shoe came off, you'll see that horse heading back to their barn to be, doctored up, and whatever has to be done is taken care of. There has never been a horse on the street that has died from heat. And like Aiden, when he spoke, there was only been 6 incidents in the last 32 years.
Okay.
I mean, things like that. And we're all willing to come to the table and talk, but we want to be involved too.
Right.
I mean, because we want to know up front, what are the rules? And what do we
Right.
need to do? And, we have our own rules, and I believe you said earlier that you do your own rules to, take care of your own horse. Yes, we do.
Okay.
And there's days, if we felt it's too hot, we don't go. I mean, our company basically runs 4 to 5 days at the most a week. Because we're not as big as a couple of the other companies that can rotate their horses as frequently as we can. But I mean, we're not out there to hurt no one. We make a lot of people's lives, a lot of little kids happy.
Right.
And we tell people where to go, how to spend their money in the city of St. Louis.
Right.
I mean, with things that's been happening here in St. Louis, we need all the good publicity that happen instead of all bad. And banning the horses is ridiculous. I understand you guys want a regulation, so do we. We have never been against regulations. We just want to know who's going to regulate us.
Right, we
and
just
how we're
want
going
to
to do
make
this.
sure that you all do have guidelines that you all follow, and then two, we need to make sure that it's a win-win on both ends. So,
Correct. And all drivers that come out there they're basically certified one way or the other. They're trained for normally a couple weeks at a time. They come out when they ride around with another driver, and they're out there, just on a regular shift, learning everything. They do everything until either a barn manager or a manager approves them to go out on the street. So we're not just sending out anybody out on the street to start driving all at once. Everyone is trained properly, all four companies.
And I'm real clear that, and I tell people all the time, you have good employees, you have bad employees.
Well, yes,
And
that
so
happens everywhere.
What I'm asking from the carriage companies are, when people come to you and have issues, don't take it and be combative. Take it and step back and say, okay, it's a problem, let's try to fix it.
Correct.
Because I think that's what kind of got Alderman Bakari upset, is the arrogance and the response that he got, as if to say, we're not being accountable to anybody. And so that's where we are as legislators, to make sure that our citizens are safe and the animals that you all take care of are safe. So that's why I said we need to make it a win-win all the way around.
Right. But I think
So-
what happens when you start talking ban, you get everybody pretty nervous. I mean, a lot of us have a lot life savings into our companies
And
to
I
start off.
understand that, but
and,
that's why I think Alderman Coder made a good point. We need to come to the table, come up with a process, make sure that it's, people are there that can hold people accountable, and so then it'll be a win-win. So, I don't not want you all to not be in business. I just want to make sure that the horses and the citizens are taken care of.
I'm sure if you talk to all 4 owners, they would be willing to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Alderwoman Martin.
No questions.
All right. Alderman Vaquero.
I'll keep it short, because I have talked to some that said any regulations would cost some money, and they don't make money to start with, to the point that the horses will be sold to who knows where. I will assume that you'll continue to operate out in St. Charles and other places, so I don't think you're just going to go out of business overnight.
Well, we probably would, because there are 4 companies here, and no place, St. Charles, there's companies out there, no one could handle all of us.
What do they charge you to operate in St. Charles? And everything I see, and we could bring in the city offices that can give us these answers, but I would say out of the 4 carriage companies, the income to the city is less than $10,000.
Well, maybe it's not income, it's more of the enjoyment.
Well, I mean, but
It's
they
not
were
all
just
about
saying,
money all the time.
But the testimony I was hearing about, the money the city makes and all this, the city isn't making any money off this. And I know everybody says they take really good care of the horses, and I know that eventually we're going to have to cut the meeting short, but I want the health department to come in, and there's an attorney here that has facts where they actually did inspections on some of the horses, and they found the horses to be in poor conditions, the stables to be in poor. Well, they're the one in this big book. I'm sure it's in there, but they brought in stuff last week saying a little bit different of what we're being told today. Plus, to say that again the city will be lost without that $10,000. I strongly believe if there were regulations, there would have to be 2 people in that carriage at all times. I strongly believe each owner. Well, I know you think it's funny, but it's a public safety issue. When you're not on that horse, and you can laugh, but then I'll just get excited and give my side. It's not funny when a horse is allowed to run when nobody's on it. To say that there's supposed to be somebody in control of that reins, I have horses, but to say somebody's being in control of that rein and not be on that horse, well, you don't, again.
Well, have you ever...
So if I'm doing regulations, you're going to see 2 people on a horse. You're going to see each separate operator having to carry at least some minimal insurance. And I was told when I talked about 2 riders on a horse to one of the owners that there's no way they can afford it, that it'd be too expensive to be safe to the public. I'm just, I sit here and I listen. I try to understand. I was in business for myself for years. I was in the car wash business. Where the dirty water went from the cars was regulated. We didn't like it. Our gas hoses were regulated because of vapors. We didn't like it. But there were regulations. And we never sued the air pollution people. The horse company, maybe it's not yours, but they're suing the taxi commission. So, I sit here and I listen, and anyway, I'm sorry.
they're suing because they have a right to sue.
Right.
And that's one company.
And the reason they're suing is because they don't agree with the regulations.
No, that is not the problem.
Then what is the reason?
When Brookdale Farms gets up here and talks to you, they can actually tell you, but they are not suing about regulations.
So you're fine if the regulations say there has to be 2 people on it?
No, that's totally ridiculous.
Okay,
I mean,
so nobody's in control of the reins?
Because what do you want, one driver to hold one rein and the other driver to hold the other?
No. Why are there not people in that seat holding the reins while people are getting on and off? Because they get off the horse. Why are horses running off? And to say that the horses, well, these incidents didn't happen in St. Louis. It was in St. Charles where a horse drowns. Nobody was in control of the reins. There was a horse that ran down the river that could have caused a lot more damage. Nobody was in control of the reins.
There was a driver.
There needs to be somebody in that seat at all times.
There was a driver. The driver got off.
He wasn't on that horse. He wasn't in control of the reins.
The driver had the reins. She got off to fix a problem with the bridle, and she told her customers to get off. 2 got on, and 2 stayed on. I mean, that's not her fault.
Was that horse tied to a hitching post?
Is there hitching posts on the city of St. Louis?
Oh, then nobody was
I mean,
in
if you want to
control.
invest the money, we're
Then
willing to tie
nobody
them
was
up.
in control of the reins.
Well,
No, why would we invest the money
Well,
for a company that 4 companies bring in less than $10,000 in income?
you know, that's all
When
I'm hearing
the
is like, you're
drivers
talking
are
about money,
independent-
money,
well-
money, money. How
Well,
much
no,
you bring to the
because
city.
you guys were talking about money.
No, we're not.
Okay.
That- and we didn't get paid.
I understand,
Yes.
but the city won't go broke if we don't have the.
No, and they won't go broke if we're still working either.
Right. But I get that you're here as business people protecting yourself.
Well,
your
yeah,
interests.
and you're here to represent the what?
I'm here to make sure, this has become a public safety issue. This is not, oh no, it's not a public safety issue. They have a horse run down the riverfront. What if that horse would have ran into somebody and killed somebody? We would be here talking about a whole different subject. And do you really think that if it caused mass carnage running down the river, luckily it didn't, would $1 million policy have covered somebody being killed or several people being injured? No.
Well, we're still looking at 2 times in 32 years.
No,
There's
you
been a
know,
loose
there-
horse.
Well, there's been 2 times in less than 6 months that I know of.
Okay,
But we
Alderman
still-
Carroll, is that your final question?
Can I
Okay.
add?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to clarify that the lawsuit with MTC, they're suing for regulation. They're not suing, and clarification, they're not suing about the regulations.
And I'm sorry, but in the meantime, there are none. It's kind of tied up
Which,
right
and
now.
they're wanting regulation, that's why they're suing. That's why they want the MTC to regulate them. That is why there is a lawsuit.
And I would be more than happy to have us regulate them, but they won't like the regulations.
Well, then you're not being fair, then, correct?
Well, they did say they would come to the table for, when Alderman Coder asked if they would like to come to the table and discuss what those regulations would be. I heard the carriage owner say that he would be happy to do that.
All 4 companies would. That's not a problem.
Okay, Mr. Randazza,
Yes, sir.
is that right?
Yes.
Okay, I just have a question. So what did we learn from that experience with the driver going to fix the bridle and the customer not getting off the carriage? What did we learn from that?
Well, basically what we did, we told the driver, anything, actually all of our drivers, anything happens like that again, call for another driver to come down and assist with the whatever broken equipment that was.
Let me ask you this. Do you think the driver could have demanded that the customer get off for safety reasons?
When the driver jumped off, she told them to get out. 2 of them, like I said, 2 bailed.
I understand.
Or walked off, and the other 2 wanted to stay there and get their pictures taken. And
Okay,
in the meantime, the horse had a broken bridle.
Right.
She was trying to get it fixed. In the meantime, she couldn't keep an eye on the 2 that were still in the carriage that should have already exit the carriage.
Right. I'm looking for the teachable moment. So I'm going to ask you again, do you think that the driver can demand that for public safety reasons that all passengers exit the
Yes.
carriage?
Yes.
And that could be a policy?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you. Oh.
Mr. Chairman,
Follow-up question?
yes.
Go ahead, Alderman Moore.
I see that your money is regulated. And I think the problem is that you need to sit down, all you guys need to sit down together and come up with an established book of rules and regulations that can be enforced. But I don't see taking the horses off the street. But I see that it's confusion about who's regulating and who's running the ship, who's driving at the helm, who's driving the vehicle, meaning that who's driving the rules and regulations, who's enforcing you guys, and that's where the confusion is coming in at. But they got your money regulated.
Yeah, they don't have no problem doing that.
Right. So I think you need to go back to the drawing board, go back to the table, and get it figured out as what rules are you going to abide by and who's going to enforce, and establish some great rules for the industry and move on with it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Jeff.
Alderwoman Murphy.
Just, I'm not familiar. Do carriages, are the horses ever tied up at like a hitching post? I'm thinking of Dodge City, you know, when they get off,
No,
and they
ma'am,
would
they're
tie
not.
up before they went in the
No.
saloon?
All drivers are required to hold their reins, their
Okay.
lines.
Okay, then my second question is, do the carriages have some kind of a brake mechanism?
Yes, they do.
That's what I thought, so, okay. So as far as like just running away, it would be rather difficult if the brake was engaged?
Correct.
Okay,
But I mean, it's a foot pedal where the driver will push down on the brake,
okay.
to stop it.
But there's no like permanent
No,
brake
ma'am.
thing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, maybe that would be something to look into. I don't know. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Kelsey McLean. Kelsey McLean. KELSEYMCLEAN.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm a St. Louis City resident, and I also work downtown. Before that, I lived downtown for 2 years. And my office building actually overlooks the Cardinal Stadium. And just last week, when the Cardinals had some of the early 6:15 games that were going on, I looked out my office window and saw carriage horses going by around 5 and 5:30 p.m. Now, from my understanding, there are regulations stating that the carriage horses should not be out during rush hour. Carriage horses should not be out within certain time periods, I think within an hour or so of an event that is downtown. And I saw both of those regulations being broken by the drivers that were out at that time. And I agree with Alderwoman Murphy that this is a situation where the drivers aren't taking the best interests of their animals at heart. They're not, they're saying they don't know who regulates them. Well, everyone agrees that the regulations are in place, the regulations regarding the temperature, the regulations regarding when the horses should be out and at what time. So even if there aren't people out policing at that time, whether it's the police or the health department or the taxi cab commission, I think it speaks volumes as far as what the priorities for the carriage horse companies are. And I just wanted to give my firsthand experience with living and working downtown and walking around and seeing drivers off of the carriage horses, standing on the side, seeing manure in the streets, things of that nature.
Thank you. Next speaker is Darren Umpus. Okay.
Real brief, I just want to be here.
Go ahead and bring the microphone up to you.
Real brief, I just want to be here in support of being a carriage driver and what it means to me. This is my only source of income these days, and it's been a great source. I want to thank Alderman Culver for having the open mind to at least bring it to the table of understanding. Then I also like to show disappointment to Alderman Vicario. Sounds like he was not prepared for some of the accusations that he brought forward. He had no witness statements. He just brought up, it seemed like everything was hearsay. Hold on, don't interrupt me, please. You'll get your turn.
Actually, I
Wait a
can.
minute, excuse me. Hold on, let him finish.
Once again, and before he was trying to interrupt me, it sounds like everything was hearsay, and for the accusations that he brought forward, he had no names, no statements, and with the groups that he brought forward, no one here to support any of his statements. It may come up later, but I think those are some extreme accusations that he's bringing, and a lot of damage that it would cause to our livelihood with that. And that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Okay,
Like
and
to
you're
reply.
representing drivers. Is that right? You're
Well,
a
from the
driver.
cloud, yes.
You're an independent driver.
Yes, I am.
And let me ask you this, so you have to get a license?
Yeah, I've had a license.
Is that a business license?
No, it's just through the taxi cab commission is what they asked.
How much is that license?
Last time I did the license, close to $400.
How are drivers compensated?
Through commission only, it's 100% commission.
100% commission?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask Alderman Moore.
No question.
No questions.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Murphy. Okay. Alderman Coulter? No questions. Any questions? Okay. Alderwoman Boyd?
Thank you.
Alderwoman Martin?
No questions.
Thank you.
I have a statement.
Alderman Vaccaro.
Okay,
First off,
yes, sir.
we'll wait till everybody gets up. You weren't here at last month's meeting. These are not fault, you're telling me the horse did not drown? Are you telling me the horse did not run free?
I'm saying what you don't have is
No,
the facts.
what I'm saying is you're not seeing the facts.
Okay.
The facts are that this has been a danger not only to the horse, but to the people on the riverfront. And when they get to the rest of the testimony, and when you hear from the health department, you'll see there's additional facts. But to stand here and say that I don't know what I'm doing, I do know what I'm doing.
I don't think so.
Excuse me, sir, let me say this. So we don't need any disrespect. Now, we let you
course.
speak, and Alderman Carroll held his peace.
He's asking me questions.
He's not asking you a
Making a
question.
statement.
Sir,
Okay.
he's not asking you a question.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm just making a statement.
Okay.
And my statement's pretty simple, that I do know what I'm doing, and this originated from the couple companies, which I talked to 2 different companies, and their unwillingness to want to be regulated. When I said maybe we should put just a second person on the carriage, that would help make the difference, just like the gentleman that was up here before stated, they're not willing to want to do that, and it would be too cost ineffective. No carriage company was going to come to the table and talk to me about anything. That's why I have to go to such drastic measures. So I know what I'm doing.
Can I ask a question? Have you ever driven a carriage? Do you know what that entails?
You know,
That's the question. Have you,
You know
ever
what,
driven a carriage?
Mr. Bumpers, I want to thank you for your
thank
testimony.
you.
And we're going to move on to, it says Macara, M-A-C-K-A-R-A. Macara, okay.
Mac-era.
Mac-Ara,
Thank you.
okay. Mac-Ara. Oh, that's 2 different names.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, it looked like
That's
it
all
was
right.
one.
Just like to relay an incident that I witnessed on the first weekend of May.
I'm sorry, are you a city resident?
City, no.
Yeah, tell us what your address is.
Oh, I'm sorry, 4817 Colony Church Road,
Okay, did you catch that?
South County.
Okay, thank you, go ahead.
Okay. It was the first weekend in May. After the climate change march and rally, I had to hang back because I needed a tow truck. Observed the storm clouds coming in from the west, looking down on Market. Anybody could tell that we were going to have a big storm coming, as we did. I witnessed, first of all, a carriage operating towards the east, toward downtown, in a little lighter rain, but by the time I witnessed the second horse carriage, we were in a major downpour at 4 o'clock. What I saw was at Market and 9th Street, a driver who obviously knew that there was going to be a big storm coming up because he was decked in rain gear, approached Market and 9th, and then with blatant disregard for the welfare and safety of his animal, turned left on the red light and was proceeding, I assume, to go back to the station, hopefully, for his horse. In other words, he had plenty of time to observe the weather conditions and then actually be out in the rain. But he chose, I guess, for financial interests to stay as late as he could in the rain and make the horse operate under those conditions. And it can be verified with the weather department about the degree of the rainstorm at 4:15 on that first weekend of May. I'd just like to say, this isn't about financial interests of the carriage industry. It's not about the pleasures and happiness of little children and their parents on the carriages. It's just about the horses. Horses have to come number one. And a lot of us think the horses are not put number one by the industry in St. Louis. Done.
Thank you for sharing that. The next speaker is Greg Streeter.
Greg Streeter, owner of St. Louis Carriage.
St. Louis Carriage, okay. Go ahead, sir.
So I want to address a few issues. I'm probably the oldest carriage company owner. I mean, the carriage company, I'm not the oldest. Then again, I might be the oldest. But I've been around since 1985. We started it. And the regulations were put up by Mr. Mike Stokes, who wrote the ordinances for the carriage company when we started the carriage company in '85. And we would go to the Board of Public Service, and the Board of Public Service was regulating us at that time. There was no health department, it was the Board of Public Service. If the health department was there, they were very low-key. As the years went by, Taxi Cab Commission came into existence. They came to me as there was only two of us at that time. The original carriage companies were St. Louis Carriage Company and then Cheshire, which was owned by Steve Apted. And then Brookdale bought out Cheshire. They came to us and asked if we could help them write regulations for the MTC. So we sat down with them and we wrote regulations for the MTC, and they're right here. And they worked with us and they helped us to generate what we needed to make the carriage industry safe. I've always prided myself on the well-being of the horse. You're not going to make any money if the horses look like hell. I mean, it's just a fact. They can't be skin and bones. They have to be fat. So we worked on that. So then that came up with that. And then when the thing happened with Brookdale and the MTC, they started to collapse, and they weren't regulating us anymore. So then came the health department. So the health department decided that they would write regulations. So their first ones were in June 18th of 2015. So we had the famous incident with Pamela Walker, who was the head of the health department at that time, who saw Moose, I think it was Moose, who was breathing hard, and she decided to throw up her arms and say, okay, we need to ban the horses, which coming from a city commissioner I don't think was appropriate at the time. So she came down and went through all of our, came down to our building, came through it, and then Pam Walker called me and she goes, you know what, I wish all stables looked like yours. She goes, I am so happy and impressed, but guess what, I still want to ban you. Okay, so we were up against the rock. She wrote out these regulations about the temperature. So we went, I asked if we could be part of the rules and regulations for the temperatures, things like that for the horses. They said they would get involved. They didn't. The next thing I know is they called a veterinarian named Jeff Nibbs to help them to come up with the heat regulations. And the heat regulations were at the 96 and 105, which is what it was set for MTC. And apparently she didn't like that, so Melba wrote down, we were at 96 on July 13th. She had it at 96 and 100, and then 6 days later she decided to change it to 93 degrees, which is totally unfair, and with no veterinarian background. The other thing is that there is what we call, which came up with this new regulations, is the Henke body conditioning. So it's a scale from 1 to 10, but your horse has to be in between 4 and 7. 4 being too skinny and can't work, and 7 being, anything above 7 being too fat. Personally, I like them a little heavier because I think it looks good. The vets come down and they did all the Henke body conditioning. All my horses were 5 and 6. All of them were in the perfect. As far as Joe was saying about how much money do we pay, as my carriage company, I pay $12,000 in real estate tax to the city, $7,000 in personal property tax, earnings tax of $10,000, business license of $1,100, and then the carriage tax of $2,500 for the carriage. In the old days, the Board of Public Service set out the rules for the carriage permits at $75 per carriage. I own 20 carriages. That's what I would pay, and that's what the MTC had us pay. And the original one was when he was talking about the incidences, so I don't know if Joe realized it was my horse that ran down in St. Charles and drowned, and it was a driver error, and it wasn't when they were doing the jobs. They were done with the carriage service in St. Charles that day, and they were over at the trailer, and she broke protocol by taking the bridle off the horse before the horse was disconnected. Unfortunately, the horse ran down, and it did go into the water, and she was fired. I got a lot of people yelling at me that I fired her right before Christmas, but it was an incident that it's one that I couldn't excuse. And I was there to pull out the horse. We do love him. My little 7-year-old was there, along with my 13-year-old and 16-year-old. We all watched as we had to go down and help pull him out of the river. It's sad. We've all lost dogs. We've lost cats, and we try to teach them. But they are pets, but they also do work. And you can't keep draft horses. They just don't go. Mine are bigger than most of them, and you can't keep them out on pasture. They won't survive. You have to be able to bring them in, feed them, grain them, hay them. They just can't survive out on the open range. Light horses, you might be able to get away with that. Big guys, you can't.
Okay, Mr. Streeter, thank you. Do you have any questions from the committee? Alderman Moore?
Who do you think should regulate you?
I'm in favor of anybody that wants to take us on. I follow the regulations. I'll be happy to, health department, but I want it to be fair, and I would love to sit down with them, with a veterinarian from the Humane Society. I don't care who it is. Sit with us. I never knew about his bill. He didn't come to me. Nobody came to me. I'm the biggest carriage company out there. I got 17 carriages on the streets. Did anybody come talk to me? Nobody did. We follow the rules. I know I don't get in trouble. We have had, a runaway horse in St. Charles. I apologize. The other episode that they talk about is the lady with her finger got bit off. You know what happened? The truth. Let's hear what the truth was. She was drunk. She came out of the bar at Drury Inn, her and 3 people. They were from Minnesota. They came out, and they go, "We want to pet your horse." And the driver said, "You are not allowed to pet the horse. You can pet the neck." She goes, "No, I want to pet the head." She goes, "No, you cannot. Please back away." And the driver asked the men to please hold her because she was obviously intoxicated. You know what she did? She stuck her hand right up the horse's mouth. And the mouth came down and took off her little part, and it went on the ground. It's not the horse's fault. That's human. I mean, did you guys just watch the Welsh rugby player? He stuck his hand in the lion to pet the lion, and it attacked him. So do we put the lion down for that? No. Stupidity. I mean, it's just, there's things that like that. There's some of the stuff that's just not fair.
In your opinion, who do you think, or what do you think we should do to start to break this confusion? This is totally chaos.
I don't know that it's chaos, but I would say that if you want the health department, what I would recommend, Board of Public Service. Board of Public Service has a streets department on there. You can have the health commissioner on there. You have all the commissioners. Put us back to the Board of Public Service, and please, I will be sitting there with you to go over all these rules.
Will we amend these rules that we have, or will we start over?
You know what? I think if you look at some of these rules, they're very good. I don't know that I would start over, but I think a lot of the rules are very good, and we can work with these. The ones that I think that we need to think about are the ones that, more people are worried about are the heat rules, and then I understand Joe's position on he wants 2 drivers up there. It is not feasible to do that. You can't have 2 people up there and then make it worthwhile for a living. One is good, and follow protocol. There might be an accident. Teddy, with the horse, when the bridle falling off, that's a problem. My girl with the horse.
Will you say the Board of Public Service and the taxi companies?
I don't think you need the taxi cab commission. I'm just saying Board of Public Service. Taxi cab commission probably won't be in existence much longer because Uber is making sure that's gone. So please put us back with the Board of Public Service. It worked great back in '85 up until '93, '94. No, it was even later, 2000. Whoa. And so put us there. But to ban us, I don't think it's right. I started Tillis Park in '87. We were doing the first carriage company. We did the Tillis Park for years. Before I left Tillis Park in 2009, when I had my little child, a lady came to me with the USA Today paper, and it said the 10 greatest things you can do with your grandkids for Christmas. You know what number 7 was? Taking a carriage ride at Tillis Park. If we were that bad, would we be rated like that? No.
Okay, we're going to take Alderwoman Murphy. You have any questions? Okay, Alderman Coulter.
Chairman.
Thank you.
No questions. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Boyd is not here. Alderwoman Martin, any questions? Okay. Several of us on other committees, I don't mean to rush, but thank you, Mr. Streeter.
Okay.
We're going to, there's only a couple more carriage companies here. We're going to go with the Christine Ellis.
Hello. I'm Christine Ellis, and I own American Queen Carriage Company with my husband, Teddy. I don't really, I think a lot of the issue with the MTC is that there's not really, basically they state that they have no authority over non-motorized vehicles that weren't grandfathered in from the time the commission was formed, which the commission was formed in 2003. Taxi Cab Commission took the horse carriages in 2007. I think that that's a lot of the issue with, the issue that I see with going back to them. It's always been like, they have us, they don't, they drop us, they took us back, they split us up, they gave half of us to the health department. I've driven for 19 years down here professionally in St. Louis since 1998. And I think that when I started, it was handled by the Board of Public Service, and I do honestly think, excuse me, that that is the best place for the carriages to go back to, really. And you know, when my husband brought up the facts of the money and stuff like that, it's not really the money that we paid to MTC that was not conducive. It was when you bring a new person who wants a job, they must need money, and you tell them, okay, well, after you train for 2 weeks, it's going to cost you an additional $400 to get started with your new job. That's a lot of investment for sometimes people. I've been around for so long, people think, hey, I want to drive a horse carriage, and then they get down there, they do it. Maybe they don't like to be outside for so long, maybe the cold bothers them, maybe any number of a reason. But to make that much of an investment to start a job, I think is a lot to ask for anybody, $400. And it's not really the fees for us. I never had a problem paying the fees to them. And the fees are based on how many carriages you have, so it was lesser for us because we just started up in 2015. But as Mr. Streeter stated, he paid X amount because he had 17 carriages. It goes by how many carriages you have. But I don't think that anybody is against regulations. To my knowledge, we've been regulated from the health department since July of 2015. I was emailed September 23rd about not operating our horse carriages at 3:30. Normally, like my husband said, they do that earlier, but they've been regulating us since July of 15. And honestly, everything is stating we're not regulated, we're not this, we're not that. We would like to be regulated, and go along with the department that we belong in, wherever that may be. But again, I think that the Board of Public Service is a wonderful place for the carriages to be handled by, because I know we were originally. And really, it was, I believe that was in 1998 that I started, that they were handled that way.
Okay. Well, thank you for your testimony.
You're welcome.
We're not going to take any questions right now. We're going to move to Jerry Kirk.
Will I be able to ask that person a question?
Thank you, sir. Yes, my name's Jerry Kirk. I own Brookdale Farms Carriage Service, and I will echo the sentiments of the other carriage owners. We're happy to work with anybody for regulations as long as it can be clarified what we're doing, who we're doing it with, and what's expected of us.
Okay, so you're the one that
Yes, sir.
filed the lawsuit. So without compromising, your lawsuit, can you speak to why you filed the lawsuit? So we're clear, because
Yes, sir.
this whole
No,
process
I
is
understand
very
completely.
confusing to us, and we hear one thing from here and we hear something over there, so since you're the one, that would be very helpful if you can.
So the lawsuit for us was about clarification as to who actually who actually regulates the carriages and what goes on. I think what people are overlooking is that the Taxi Cab Commission was sued by an animal rights group in order to continue, or in order to regulate us again. They were regulating us, then they stopped with no information to us. We never found out until drivers went to renew their licenses, and they said, sorry, we're no longer collecting license fees from you guys because we're not regulating you, because there was some kind of a question as to whether or not they could regulate non-motorized vehicles. So they weren't regulating us for about a year and a half, I would say, something like that. Then there was a lawsuit filed by some animal rights groups asking them to do it, and then nothing changed as far as their charter as to whether or not they could regulate the non-motorized vehicles or all those kind of things. They were collecting fees from us, not doing inspections on carriages, not issuing us the medallions, not doing any of those kind of things. That's why we filed the lawsuit.
Okay.
But I mean, and I think it's important to note too that what you're hearing about the horses and how the horses are regulated by the health department. So every year our horses have to be veterinary inspected and qualified to do the carriage work. Those papers are filed with the health department to state that the horses are fit to do the job, that they are being well taken care of. The health department can inspect the stables or anything like that. The other thing you're hearing about, the heat regulation, that has become a huge confusion for us and a problem for us because of this. When the new order came out, whether it was accidental or on purpose or whatever, and I asked for clarification several times via email, the regulation states, we get it like some of the other operators have told you, we get it on days when the forecast is above 93 degrees, we get emails telling us that we cannot work for that 24-hour period, not before it becomes 93 degrees, not after it's below 93 degrees. So that 24-hour period, that's where it kind of became an issue for the carriage companies and the operators.
Okay, let me take.
So the health department is regulating you, and the taxi cab commission is taking your money, and you don't know why BPS stopped regulating you.
Right.
So how would we fix that?
I agree with the idea of all of us coming together and figuring out some common sense regulations that make sense, that everybody knows where we're at, what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to handle things. I'm 100% for that. And I spoke to Alderman Vaccaro on the telephone and told him that then too also, that I have absolutely no issues with that at all. I just want to know what's expected of me, and I don't want to be cited for things that I didn't know about or things that you know, that all just magically come up. I noticed I know on the last meeting there was talk from the health department about carriages being out in the heat. And that day, every single other day that they've asked us not to work or told us not to work for a 24-hour period, they sent an email at 7:30 in the morning. That day, they sent an email at 3:30 in the afternoon.
Do you or anyone know why BPS stopped regulating you guys?
Because the Taxi Cab Commission was instituted. We, along with Greg, helped set up the rules for the Taxi Cab Commission. They asked them to take over the
Taxi Cab Commission to take over BPS.
Yes, they asked the Taxi Cab Commission to take over the oversight of the regulation.
Asked them to take over.
Correct.
The state of Missouri, I believe, created the Taxi Cab Commission.
Correct.
For St. Louis County and St. Louis City, and so that's when it pretty much transitioned.
BPS thought it was better,
Then they passed us to them.
so you would like them back.
I'll go any place you want me to go.
Right, Alderwoman Murphy.
Another just technical question. How do the horses have access to water?
Well, ma'am, our horses are stable. We have a stable downtown. We also have our farm in Eureka where the horses rotate when they're out in their time off. But so the horses are in their stalls. The drivers come get them ready. They're bathed, cleaned, harnessed, and all that kind of thing. They're in their stalls all day long, so they have full access to water. Then when the drivers leave during the day, they have water buckets on the carriages with them.
So during the day, when it would get, the horses have access to plenty of water?
Correct. They have access to water all the time, and then several of the businesses downtown will allow the drivers to refill buckets if they need to. We also have trucks that go around on hot days that refill water buckets and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Coder.
No questions.
Alderman Martin, Alderwoman Martin.
No question.
How do you deal with the poop?
I'm sorry, sir?
The poop?
All the carriages have diaper bags on them, so the horses are, the manure doesn't hit the street. It actually goes into the bags. We also, again, ourselves and the other carriage companies go around, we take different days of the week and go around in the spots where we generally sit. We use a disinfecting solution on places where the horses might urinate. We also clean up the manure if something were to hit the street or things like that. That's something that we've always, Greg and I have done since the beginning of time, and then the other carriage companies have gone on too. So we have guys that'll go around and check the spots that we sit regularly, that kind of thing.
So if a business had a problem with the smell, they could call?
They call us, and that does happen on a routine basis. And you know, if there's something that we miss or something like that, people will call us and we'll take care of it.
Okay, Alderman Vaccaro? Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Rachel Poole.
Hello. My name's Rachel Poole. I am the manager for American Queen Carriage Company.
For who?
American Queen Carriage Company.
That's where Mr. Ted and Miss Christine work.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything you want to add? I'm just trying to move through this. Is there anything you want to add that they didn't speak on yet?
I have a bachelor's degree in equestrian business management. I also have a master's in equine science.
Okay.
So my issue is definitely more with the horses and the temperature.
Okay.
And the lack of veterinary knowledge that has gone into making the decisions for the temperatures for the horses. Horses live outside. They are consummately adept at cooling themselves off or heating themselves up if they're hot or cold. They have lots of cooling mechanisms for themselves. They control every hair on their body. They stand up. The wind comes through, cools the sweat off, and they lay their hairs back down. They sit a little hotter than we do. They sit about 101 degrees. So until the ambient temperature outside, the true temperature without the humidity, hits 101, the horses actually don't absorb heat. So the fact that our temperatures are 96 degrees is actually really reasonable, 5 degrees below anything that a horse would even begin to have a problem with operating in. And again, definitely that we are definitely regulated. You know, we have heat restrictions that we go by. All of us are consummate horse people, and just like Greg said, if our horses don't look well, we don't do well. You know, they are certainly our livelihoods, and we look to take good care of them. And that is what I had to say.
Thank you. Stand fast for me. Alderman Moore? No. Alderwoman Murphy? No. Alderman Coulter?
No questions.
Alderwoman Martin?
No questions.
Okay. Tell me again your background. You're the business manager. You have a bachelor's?
I have a bachelor's degree in equestrian business management.
In what is it called?
Equestrian is horses. Equestrian business management.
Okay, that's horses. Okay.
And a master's in equine science.
Okay. And you've heard some of the issues where some carriage drivers disobeyed law enforcement, disobeyed the health department, violating rules, whether they're confusing or not. Some things may be common sense, like you can't go past this barrier because the police said do not. What are your thoughts about that? Because it seems like I keep hearing we're regulated, but we're not regulated. So,
You know, I have driven a carriage for 10 years now. And, you know, I was out when the public health department came out the other night, and somebody said they asked us to go in. I want to tell you, I talked to Christian, who apparently is the on-call animal control guy. And he never at one point in time told me that I had to take my horse and carriage and go in. We did have a conversation about how the temperature had changed and about how we hadn't gotten an email that morning. And he said that he was aware of that he was sent out to take pictures. But never in any of that time was I told to go in off the streets, nor were any of my drivers.
Are you aware of any citations being issued to any company, and for what type of violations?
That was going to be my next conversation. So if they really didn't want us out on the street, if the public health department didn't want us out on the street on Saturday, they issued no citations, they issued no tickets, they issued no warnings. Neither does the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission. So while we are definitely interested in regulation and sitting down for a regulatory body, like we aren't sure who we should be talking to, because we call the tax cap commission and they tell us no, and we call the health department and they tell us no. I can't tell you how many times we've been here in this building trying to talk to people about some of these regulations and some of the things that have been changing, and nobody knows who to send us to.
Okay, so let me ask you this. The temperature, the heat index, it exceeds what the rules of MTC or the health, so the health inspector comes out and say, hey, it's too hot, go in, and the driver says no.
Write a
there's-
ticket.
Is there a ticket on the book that's be written?
I don't know, but we'll make one.
Well,
And we are not against being regulated like that. You know, we as horse people, again, we don't take our horses out in temperatures that are dangerous for them, but if you're gonna have people who don't argue, I mean, you give people speeding tickets
Right,
when they don't
right.
follow the speed limit. As we were talking about earlier, of course, you can control the speed limit.
right.
You know, I don't know what kind of ticket you would like that to be. Maybe that's something, again, that we sit down and discuss when we talk about it.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Jeannie, can you come up to the, thank you so much, ma'am. Jeannie is with the health department. I just have a quick question on citations, because this whole conversation is, I get both sides. I mean, it's so confusing. It's like left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So if an inspector goes out and exceeds the temperature and so on and so forth, what do we do?
We ask them to abide by the commissioner's order that states that if the temperature is forecast to be 93 degrees during that day, that they do not operate.
And if they just blow you off and keep operating, then what happens?
We cannot issue any kind of ticket.
Okay. So
we
there are
can
no
only issue a
consequences to
ticket
these
if-
regulations as promulgated, basically.
Yes.
It's just almost like the honor system. Okay, thank you.
You don't tow the horse, do you?
Amy Harrison.
Hello, thank you. I own property and a business in the city located at 3957 Park Avenue, and I'm just here simply to say that I do support the ban on carriage horses. I love our city, and I want it to be associated as a progressive city with kindness and accountability, and we don't need carriage horses in modern times. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Bonnie Boehm, I'm sorry, tell me how to say it. I've heard it before. Boehm? Okay. And you did testify last week, so you want to add to it last week?
I do have a few things to add.
Okay.
Probably the most important observation is that we've heard all of the carriage companies insist that they have no problems being regulated. There's just confusion as to who regulates them. Well, each member of the committee has received a binder with about 236 pages of documentation of our effort over the past 4 years to get them to comply with regulations and their consistent resistance to do so. So I've also consistently heard them say that they just want to be brought to the table to help develop reasonable regulations. Well, as Mr. Streeter pointed out, they actually did help develop the regulations that are on the books that they've been consistently ignoring. And it is true that I do represent an animal rights organization. I don't consider us to be overly emotional or irrational, but this issue was not at the top of our agenda. We got involved because we kept getting calls from the public because the calls that they were making to other agencies just weren't going anywhere. And we became more involved when a Brookdale Farms horse, King, dropped dead while attached to a carriage full of passengers in St. Louis County's Tillis Park. And that is when we learned that the Taxi Commission had stopped enforcing the regulations. And since then, there has just been one incident after another. So the claim that there have only been 6 incidents in 32 years is patently false. At the last hearing, I gave everybody a list of documented incidents that had happened and been reported by local media since the Taxi Commission stopped regulating in 2013. And again, you have ample documentation that these problems are public safety issues, they're animal welfare issues, they make our city look bad, They're a nuisance for people that live and work downtown. And these are calls that we've been getting from the public for several years. So we do support Alderman Vaccaro's bill. We believe that it should be passed as written. In addition, if Mr. Kirk is actually agreeable to being regulated, I would expect that he would drop his lawsuit in St. Louis County and allow the Taxi Commission to resume their enforcement. Any questions?
Thank you. No questions. Okay. Daniel Cold? Okay. The lawyer. Okay.
Hi, thank you all for having me and the time and the efforts, and Mr. Vaccaro, and I also want to thank the City Councilor's office. As soon as this came to the attention of the City Councilor's office about the problems with the stay order on Brookdale Farms, City Councilor immediately jumped in on behalf of the city and went down there, and they're litigating this thing in St. Louis County. So we are really appreciative of the efforts of the City Councilor's office in addressing this. I don't want to go through a lot because I know you've heard a bunch. I wanted to sort of respond to a couple of things. You know, for me, this started when the animal rights team called me about King and asked me to help them do some sunshine requests to the Taxi Cab Commission in St. Louis County. Well, we got a letter back from the Taxi Cab Commission, and it's in my documents there. It's in number 6. That's from the attorney for the Taxi Cab Commission. And he said, and right in there directly, we don't do this. This is the city's problem. Go bother them. I spoke to your former city councilor, and he said, no, Dan, that's most definitely not the case. You need to go bother the MTC. So we ended up filing a lawsuit over this in 2014. And what we asked for was this industry be regulated. None of the regulations were being enforced. So we weren't asking for a ban. We weren't doing anything, you know, radical or emotional extreme. We brought a lawsuit against the Taxi Cab Commission and said, hey, you guys have all these regulations, and they're actually pretty simple. If you look at tab 1, that was the regulations that were in place at the time. It's only 5 pages, and actually it's promulgated in the Vehicle for Hire Code, so I don't see where, you know, the companies are saying, well, we're confused about what the rules are. All you do is go to the MTC website, and they're right there. So we filed this lawsuit, and it was us against the Taxi Cab Commission and the 2 carriage companies at the time, Brookdale and St. Louis Carriage Company. What came out of that is about 1.5 years of litigation. When they stand here today and say, oh, we want regulations, we're willing to have regulations, St. Louis Carriage Company and Brookdale Farms sent their lawyers down and resisted this for 1 year at every turn. What came out of this is a memorandum of understanding between the city and the Taxi Cab Commission, and that is at tab 10. This was presented to the court. Actually, Brookdale Farms and St. Louis Carriage Company and MTC, their lawyers brought this to me. They were the ones that went to the court and said, no, we're going to have more regulations. Judge, you know, we got the MTC regulations in 608. Now Dan gets this memorandum of understanding. These guys should be happy, Judge. These are the rules, and these are really good rules. Now they say here today, we don't like the rules. So I think that's a little disingenuous. So our suit ended in 2016, last summer. These guys still weren't complying. They knew what the rules were. We're getting calls. They're still out there between 4 and 6. Like Mr. Streeter and Mr. Kirk said, we wrote these rules with MTC. One of the rules is no carriages on the streets between 4 and 6. They would drive by my office 2 or 3 times between 4 and 6 when I was working down here. We're still documenting this. They know the rule. They're just not going to comply. And I think that's going to be the problem, and that's why I think we're at the ban point. We ask for regulation. They're not going to comply. To make them comply at this point, after 7 years of nothing, you are going to have to spend so much time, effort, and energy to lean on these people to make them comply. They won't even get off the streets between 4 and 6, the simplest rule that they helped write. So I don't see where this confusion is. Their lawyers were there in the courtroom when they brought the MOU in. They knew what 608 was. And I'd like you to turn to tab 2, and I would like you to see what happened after the MOU went in place and what your contract partner, MTC, sort of did to you guys. I think they're trying to leave you guys holding the bag here. They've tried to, they didn't want to do this. They got you guys to come in and say, hey, we'll help you do this. That was great of the city to offer to assist. And when you look at the second page there, it's numbered 56, so it's the second page of the packet. Look at the safety and health rules. Look what they did. They put everything on you guys. That used to be the taxi cab commission shall do this, and then there was a contract with the city, and the city, hey, we're going to help you guys do this. When you read this now, they just kind of came in and in a meeting threw you guys under the bus here and said, no, this is now on the city with this health and safety. We have Health Commissioner Order 103. Carriage companies knew about it. They objected to it. They should have raised that in 2014 when we were in front of Judge Dowd. But they didn't, because they knew they were just going to ignore it. They could have said, Judge, we don't like this. But their lawyers said, Judge, we got this MOU. We got these regulations. Dan's case is moot. You need to dismiss him. And the judge did. Didn't argue about him. They knew they weren't going to follow him. So if you look at tab, I believe it's 19, and this is what sparked the second lawsuit with Brookdale Farms suing the MTC. So out of those 2015, 2016 complaints, complaints that we were making to the city, also internal complaints, Captain Chrisman talking about carriages driving around her barricades. All those emails I included, they're in 21. I did a sunshine request on MTC, so you can see all the dialogue back and forth. Ron Klein, from the MTC, throwing up his hand, saying, I don't know what I'm going to do with these companies. Well, in tab 19, there's about 10, 12 tickets that MTC in the city issued to Brookdale Farms for violating the heat rules, operating without a license. That's what that lawsuit was. They had all these tickets. In 20, you can see Director Klein specifically say to them, hey, I believe it's to Captain Chrisman, Brookdale Farms is at the revocation threshold with tickets. And what does Brookdale Farms do? Go out to St. Louis County, not down here in St. Louis City where we had our first lawsuit, where there's the MOU. They run out to county and they say, no, you need to stop this. These guys can't regulate us. They were trying to avoid these 10 tickets. They've never wanted to be regulated. And that's what the city's out there fighting about now. And I mean, if you think about it, the city's now had to invest the city councilors' time in fighting this lawsuit because these guys refuse to comply with the regulations. And we're talking the simplest ones. Don't be on the street between 4 and 6, anywhere, period. It's right there in black and white. They don't follow it. The heat rule, well, we're confused by it. I've got the health commissioner's order. It was up on St. Louis County's website. If you're a business, you have a responsibility to check your regulations. I have a responsibility to do annual CLEs as a lawyer. Every business owner has a responsibility to know the rules. What do we say? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Well, that's what they're saying. Well, they didn't tell me this. I didn't know what the rules were. I was confused. You'll see from the documents, this is all pretty simple. And if you look at the tickets and the reports and the emails, you will see that these companies are just openly defiant. They don't care. And then they come up here today all contrite, the same way they were contrite in 2014 when I was in court, and say, but no, we want regulation, we want regulation. I'll tell you, I've been down there. I've litigated against them for a year. I've dealt with this issue since 2014. They say that when you get them backed in the corner, and as soon as you take your eye off of them, they're back to their old ways. And I was just going to see if there was anything else. And this whole thing, well, we need the vet in here. We're fighting over the temperature rule. Between 93 and 96. At a certain point, isn't that like arguing, I think the speed limit on Market should be 45, not 35? And then saying, hey, I'm just not going to comply with you if I don't like it. Not to comply with it and come here and speak to this board and say, hey, can we change this? To speak to Miss Moore and say, hey, can we change this? No, they just ignore it. They don't come and talk to you. They just decide they don't want to do it. And the last thing I want to point out is Brookdale Farms has a horrible history. In 2010, 12 of the horses that were inspected by a veterinarian had a low body score. Then King died in Tillis Park. I know I've told you about that. You'll see all the citations they received in their response in 19. You'll see Director Klein's emails and Captain Kreisman's emails in 20. And the last one I want to point you to is, it is tab 24. Brookdale Farms has had their corporate licensure suspended by the Missouri Secretary of State multiple times. Most recently in, I believe, September of 2016, the same time you guys and MTC were writing them all those tickets, they operated down here without proper corporate licensure for a year. They are not good corporate citizens. You know, they are not going to comply with regulations. They feel Alderman Vaccaro breathing down their neck, and now they're coming down here and begging you guys. I'm telling you, I've been there. They've ignored you. They've ignored me. They've ignored Judge Dowd. They are just going to keep doing it. They won't even get off the streets between 4 and 6. We're having a meeting talking about regulating them. You would think they would behave for a couple of days and get off the streets between 4 and 6. We have pictures of them down there. We have pictures of their drivers. You would think they'd be more careful with you guys. They have no respect for any rules, regulations, and they will not accept this. I fought this. If you decide you want to try to regulate, I wish you luck. And like I told Judge Dowd at our hearing, Judge, if we don't take care of this now, we're going to be back a year from now. And guess what? I was back a year later. So, thank you.
Okay, Alderman Moore?
Are you for banning the industry completely or amending the regulations?
I don't think at this point, there are regulations in place. They're just refusing to follow them. They know what they are. We've got regulations. So there's really, I don't see anything else you guys could add or amend. This is an obedience problem. It's not, to some extent, it's an enforcement problem with MTC. MTC, I know they don't want to do this, but we have regulations. So this is not, we need to write a whole bunch of new regulations. This is, we have an industry that will not comply.
What rules, who are regulating?
Well, we've got the MTC rules, Chapter 608, that are in place. That's there in tab 2. And then there's Health Commissioner's Order 103.
Are they conflicting or?
No. The MTC and the Health Commissioner, as part of our lawsuit, worked together in developing those rules. So, the MTC's lawyer brought those in.
Or have developed the rules?
Have developed, sir. I'm sorry.
Okay, you give us, in those rules, there's room for citations for violating these regulations. After so many violations with a horse, what do you do? In a vehicle, we tow it. We ticket it and tow it. What do we do with the horse that's violating?
You revoke a business license. The same way you would suspend my driver's license, you revoke their business license. But right now, there's rules in place, but Brookdale Farms went to a judge in St. Louis County and got the St. Louis County to suspend enforcement of those rules. So currently, no rules are being enforced. They're on the books, but the enforcement agents don't have the authority.
Taxi cab and the health department together with their regulations, those are the ones we should enforce.
I'm saying those are the ones that are in place. I would leave it to people with more expertise than myself to.
Why does it seem so confusing for the horse carriage people to understand that?
I don't think it is confusing to them, sir. I think the rules are very, very clear. They brought the rules in themselves to Judge Dowd in our court case in 2014, and they said, Judge, these are the rules and the regulations. I don't see what the confusion is. I think they're very simple rules. I think they don't want to follow them, and they're using every legal technicality they can to avoid having to do so. So they just ignore them, and when they get caught, they send their lawyers in to fight them.
Knowing that your business can be revoked or your license can be revoked, I'm just wondering why people would take that opportunity to violate or ignore the laws.
I understand your confusion, Alderman. I share that confusion. I don't know why it's so hard to stay off the streets between 4 and 6 with the knowledge that you could lose your license. The same way I drive 40 miles an hour when the city of St. Louis puts up a sign that says 40 miles an hour because I'm afraid that you guys will take, give me a ticket and take away my license. They just have no fear of you, sir. And they're not going to comply unless they know there's not enough enforcement agents out there. You guys would have to spend so much on enforcement to actually do this. You'd almost have to dedicate officers just to this industry. If there's no police officers out there by that stop sign, you might be tempted to run it. They know there's no police officers out there looking after them, so they're tempted to run between 4 and 6 and not care.
I had other questions, but the chairman, he rushes me, so that's all I have.
Oh, well, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Alderwoman Murphy.
So you have offices downtown?
No longer. I was downtown when I worked with a firm for, about 2.5 years.
Okay.
And then I have friends that have offices down here that I will sometimes do temporary work
Okay,
for.
thank you.
Alderwoman Martin.
Yes, I'm just looking for clarification. Are you here representing the Animal Rights League or?
St. Louis Animal Rights Team. Yes, I'm a member of the organization, and I am also their volunteer general legal counsel.
Okay, so you're not a registered lobbyist, you're there?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Let me make sure I'm clear. There was a lawsuit that you filed in 2014?
Yes, sir.
Is that right? And then it ended up being dismissed, is that correct?
Yes, November of 2015, and I put copies of our pleadings and our order in there.
And the current lawsuit that's filed in St. Louis County, there's an injunction on not enforcing the rules?
Okay, so what happened was that those 11 tickets that MTC issued, and
That's in here?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that the city councilor was going to go to court and try to enforce. Brookdale Farms sent their lawyer out to St. Louis County and filed for an injunction saying, no, MTC can't give us a ticket because we're not taxi cabs. MTC has no authority over us. Gotcha. And that suspended, the 10 tickets that the city has out there pending in the city councilor's office are just kind of floating out there in limbo waiting for this. Well, once the city councilor learned about this, because, you would think that the taxi cab commission would say, hey, wait a minute, I got a business partnership with the city of St. Louis to enforce this. I better call my business partner and say we have a problem. As soon as your city councilor found out, they immediately jumped in on that lawsuit. Gotcha. So they're in the middle of that too as now.
Okay, that clears that up.
And they're arguing that the taxi cab commission and the city do have authority, that those tickets are valid, and that Brookdale Farms should be revoked. So that's the city's argument on that case.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Sasha Zummel. No, she's not here?
No, I had to step out.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Hi. And tell us if you live in a city or.
No, I actually live in Fenton, but
Okay.
I grew up in St. Louis.
Okay.
We are here simply because we have compassion for all beings, although some people paint us as crazy animal rights extremists. We are here not because we don't want people to not have any fun, but because we want horses and humans to be safe. I grew up right here in St. Louis, and I too used to like seeing the carriage horses because I've always loved animals, but I never knew about what happened behind the scenes of this industry. As I got older, I've become more and more aware of certain hazards the horse carriages present when I wasn't even digging for it. Part of being an animal lover and activist is that we feel empathy, and it breaks our hearts to see incident after incident involving horse carriage rides. I've seen things in person, such as horses in heat distress, as well as accidents reported on the news that made me feel like I should do or say something about the horse carriages and let other people know too, and that is why we're here. Over the past 7 years, there have been a number of things that occurred that show that this industry is not properly regulated. Horses have died unspeakable deaths, and humans have gotten injured. These regulations have not been enforced, and they were written by these industries themselves. And as we've seen today, these companies don't even know what temperature is considered to be too hot for a horse to work in. If they really cared about the horses, they would know. And if they can't properly regulate themselves, then they should not be in the streets, period. Can you imagine
watching a horse run down the street at a full gallop and plunge into freezing waters, being dragged down to his death as the carriage was still attached, while people stood around and watched? Can you imagine reaching out to pet a horse and having your finger bitten off, which did happen? Can you imagine being a mother on a carriage ride with your child and all of a sudden the horse breaks out, headed straight for a collision with an SUV, leaving you to jump out of the runaway carriage in fear of your life? The industry says that these are one-time things, but they have happened more than just one time. The fact that we even have a record of multiple incidents, the fact that we even have to be here, shows that this is an issue. All these, and these are not emotions, these are facts. How many more horses have to die? How many more people have to be scared for their lives? How many more children have to see these things? Even if the carriages were properly regulated, something is bound to happen. And the fact that this happens not just in St. Louis shows that this is an issue nationwide. A couple months ago, the mom and child who jumped from the runway carriage showed on the news. Updates were given on the humans as they suffered non-fatal injuries. However, nothing was said about the horse. If this industry really cared about the welfare of the animals, why wouldn't they give a statement about the condition of the horse? And interestingly enough, one of the horse carriage industries released a petition the very next day saying that we are crazy PETA extremists and to save the horse carriage rides. None of us are PETA representatives, and it just seems funny to me that they put this petition out the day after such a traumatic incident. We are not attacking or trying to influence anyone. We are trying to protect people. If we are talking about facts, then the facts show it all. In response, they are bringing up other topics, such as vegetarians regulating the meat industry, showing that they are indeed attacking us. We have every right to protest on public sidewalk, but we always address the facts and do not attack individuals. Our opposition, however, resorts to name-calling, profanity, cyberbullying, even when we ask them politely to stop. I honestly do not see any compassion from most of them, especially when they attack us for our personal beliefs. They're right. This isn't a matter of emotions, but a matter of safety and well-being for humans and horses alike. We've never said anything bad or personal about these carriage drivers. I'm sure they're all really good people, but at the end of the day, this is about money. They use the horses to make money, and then they use the money for the upkeep of the horses. If money is the issue over the welfare of the horses and humans, then they especially shouldn't be on the streets of downtown St. Louis. That being said, there are people in St. Louis and all around America who will and want to donate money for the horses to go to sanctuary, allowing for the horses to live happy, safe, and free lives. Horses have natural instincts like grazing, running free, and just being horses. We're not saying that they should have the right to vote or something. We are just saying that they shouldn't be made to work for the carriages when the city of St. Louis doesn't benefit from it anyway, and when they propose danger in the streets. Other cities have banned horse carriages too, such as Las Vegas, the city of entertainment. I only hope that we can follow in their footsteps and take this unstable industry out of our beloved city, the city I love so much that it hurts deeply when people are getting hurt. Please take the horses out of the city streets once and for all, because we just don't want to be back here again if and when something else happens. Thank you.
Okay, Alderwoman Martin had a question for you.
I have two questions. One, do you have expertise in this field? Are you a veterinarian or?
I'm not a veterinarian, but I grew up around animals my whole life. I was a Girl Scout. I grew up right down the street from a farm. I've visited several sanctuaries.
Okay. Thank you. And then also, do you drive a red Prius?
No.
Okay. Because I've had complaints from constituents that you have verbally attacked and you drive along the carriages. So when you say it's not emotional, okay.
No, I drive
just wanted to
a
double-check.
Silver Scion.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Next speaker is Rachel Ellick.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm a resident of Arnold, and I just want to be here to say that just because horse carriages is a part of our tradition or culture doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. As humans, we've done things in the past for a long time and called it tradition or culture, and in the end decided that it wasn't right. I also believe that there's other ways of transporting people around the city, such as rickshaw taxis. Maybe instead of using horses to transport people and doing the work for them, they could maybe ride bicycles around and get some exercise. Also, if a rickshaw driver wouldn't drive in high temperatures, heavy rain, high traffic,
I don't see why it would be okay to force a horse to do that. They don't have the opportunity to speak for themselves, so that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Florentino, looks like the last name. I can't make the first name out. What's the first name? Mayor. Okay, Mayor Florentino. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Mayor Florentino. Do you need my address?
Sure.
2644 Lewis Avenue, that's in Brentwood, Missouri. And I wanted to speak to you because I wanted to refute the fact that, as was said earlier, that we are acting on emotion and irrational emotion, and again, to refute that we are not PETA. And I also want to say that I've been waiting for this day for 7 years, 6 months, and 13 days. Because that is the day in March 19th of 2010, when we first got the call, a complaint from an employee working for Brookdale Farms, identified at 804 Twin Rivers Road in Eureka. So this is not coming from us. We got calls about this, saying that the animals are extremely neglected and no one is helping. It is at that point, because we didn't know who was regulating, at that point it was MTC. She mentioned a couple names of the horses and said that they are not supposed to be used between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. and 6 p.m., and that indeed they were used, and that the authorities looked the other way. And she said there was 2 dead horses out on the property in Eureka because they were starved. Okay, so we tried to work with the Humane Society, trying to get something done, and we kind of got nowhere. And, sorry, I'm trying to find the date. And we had thought that, they would, that MTC, would make them come into compliance. So, and we also did start a campaign where we did say, save a horse, ride a rickshaw, and we had letter campaigns and whatnot. So then in December 17th of 12, an associate of the Brookdale Farms employee called and again identified their location. And it was at that time that he said for about a year they've been living in a warehouse on Lombard Street. It is unventilated, and the city vet, Dr. Fry, had gone there. So these horses are kept in an unventilated warehouse where the air was very hot, their bedding was moist, and there is no paddock for these horses. So they spend the night in a hot warehouse, and then they go out and work in the heat. And I just want to read, because these are the actual notes that I took 5 years ago, that also you talked again about the dead horses. They're supposed to be cremated, but they were buried. One horse named Silver is being used as Tilly's Park for Winter Wonderland, and he's tying up. That is rhabdomyolysis. It is extremely painful cramping of the muscles. You know how when you get a Charlie horse, how bad that hurts? So, I mean, this is coming from an employee telling me this. And that they were not giving him proper medication, bute, and they were not resting him. And the employee who worked at Brookdale, who's no longer there, said that the employees got very upset and refused to ride him, but that Brookdale owners said that he had to be ridden. He had to be used. And that this gentleman said, quote unquote, he was afraid that Silver would die. And then he went on to talk about the warehouse and no paddock. And about the wet bedding and whatnot. So Then they said that they were going to call, the ranger service was supposed to go out to Eureka to address it, and that many horses are colicking. Talked about the owners, and he said that, actually said that St. Louis Carriage Company was a really good company. Anyway, and the woman stopped working there. So, yeah, and they had reached out to Pam Walker. But anyway, so fast forward now, as you all know about the change in, who's regulating it. But this summer, it was very confusing, and I would call about the heat. I was very concerned, about the horses working in the heat. And when I called St. Louis Carriage Company, they were very good. They said that they were, pull the horses off the streets for the duration of the heat wave. But when I called Brookdale, they said, what regulation? They had no intention of taking the horses off the street. So that speaks volumes to me that if they're not going to follow. And I had been told from the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission that it was the carriage industry, that had written the rules themselves, so they should know. So I just wanted to, tell you. And then we were also in a lot of communication with a woman who worked downtown last year, and she was sending us a lot of photos and of horses that were, out during rush hour in the heat. And then August 5th, when I was downtown, I did observe 2 horse carriages with St. Louis Carriage Company that just galloped right through a red light, and they made a left turn through a red light. So, I mean, that's a pretty bad safety issue.
So you're for banning, you're for the ban, is that right?
I'm for the ban.
Okay. Riccara has a question for you.
Well, no, not a comment, but when you're talking about St. Louis Carriage Company, and there's some incidents, but I will say that that's the health inspector, Melba Moore, did say that they were the ones that would be most likely to comply and the one they had the least amount of problems with.
Mm-hmm.
That they were perfect, but they were actually the most likely to comply.
The woman who was sending me videos, and I believe our attorney, Dan, she did observe that she had an eyewitness observation of somebody smacking a horse in the face. So they're not perfect, but
Okay, Ms. Florentino, thank you so much for your testimony today.
thank you.
The last testimony we'll hear is from Tom Ellick.
I'm a resident of Arnold. On the note of tourism, I like to say I do believe that tourism for St. Louis will increase if St. Louis City can show that it regulates its streets and that the streets are safe for people and animals and commuters as well. And I'd also like to just note on, I spend my weekends in the city, and I've seen horses pulling full carriages, and to me it's pretty apparent that these horses are struggling with every step. And I mean, just to talk about what they're capable of doesn't really do them justice. And one last note, as a former independently contracted driver around St. Louis, there's other jobs, other same jobs that we could transport other. We don't need to be putting horses in front of carriages. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Let me ask you this.
Yes, sir.
So were you an independent driver for the carriage companies?
No, definitely. I was a delivery driver.
Okay.
But I'm just saying there are other, even independently contracted driver jobs. They're here, and.
Okay, and do you have any veterinary experience or anything with horses or?
No, I've cared for horses temporarily in my past, and so I'm familiar with the care that they need, but no, not professionally.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you know, if the owners wouldn't mind indulging me, if you are a carriage company owner, can you come to the podium? All the carriage company owners. Okay, so there seems to be, there's confusion. We're regulated, we're not regulated, right? As of today, this moment, raise your hand if you think you are regulated right now. Okay, so only Mr. Kirk feels there's no regulation. If there's a lawsuit that basically puts...
Can I just clarify the point? I feel like the FTC is not regulating us right now. I think the health department is.
Okay, so...
But not the FTC.
Okay, so is that why you raised your hand? You think it's the health department?
Yeah.
Only because of the health department that you're regulated. Okay, but can the health department give you a citation for, just like there were citations for driving, I guess, with between rush hour, stuff like that? They can't issue a citation for that, right?
I don't know if they can or not.
Right. Right. So for all practical purposes, it sounds like you're not really regulated, because you could be out there during rush hour, if no police show up, then you get no citation.
Yes, please.
Sure. And if you don't mind, you can come to the podium if you want to speak. That way everybody hears for the record.
I'm hearing the lawyers there and everyone talking about it. The 4 to 6 rule was put in place with MTC and the original ordinance. We realized that there was no way for the carriage operators to make money or to help out the restaurant owners and all the businesses in the downtown area that needed people shuttled around. So we talked to Ron Klein, and Ron Klein...
Remind us who Ron Klein is.
He is the head of the MTC.
Okay.
And he sat with us and he goes, listen, when the riverfront opens, you can go down on the riverfront, go on the landing, and stay in the upper part of the city, stay off of 4th Street, and stay off of Broadway, because those are the main throughways for which the people have to get out of town. We have stuck to that rule, and we are not allowed to be around the stadium an hour before and an hour after. The only exception was for our company, because I'm there. My building is right there at the baseball stadium.
Okay.
And so we were able to get a thing to go away and go up 7th Street to get to our sitting areas that are away from the city because if you're on the 4 to 6 rule, I can't leave the barn, I can't get past the stadium because the game starts at 7. So he made those exceptions for us, and he knows that those exceptions were made.
Did he write them?
Did he write them? Yes, he wrote them down, and he had a meeting with us, and he gathered us in there and told us what we could do. And so we stayed on there. When we needed an exception, when the MAC called and they needed the father-daughter dance, and it was on Washington Avenue from 5 to 7, I called Ron Klein, and he gave us the okay to have the carriages there for the MAC. So if you needed an exception, he was willing to do and work with us on that.
Okay. Here's a concern that I have, is that a driver could just disobey the rule, and there's no, currently, because of the lawsuit, there's no consequences. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment, but before the lawsuit, there were tickets and there were
Gotcha.
fines.
I'm clear. I'm trying to operate in the now, because what's frustrating is
Nothing.
I try to do things decent in order, and I try to be fair. But what is not fair is if someone can just do what they want to do in the city of St. Louis with no consequences. That's unacceptable.
I totally agree.
Period. Dot. And if we're operating in a space right now whereby carriage companies, and listen, honestly, there are good ones and there are bad ones. And I don't know either one of you guys, so you're all good for as far as I know, okay? But if we're operating in a space right now in which there are no consequences for violating rules that used to be enforced, that's not good. That's not right. And then it puts us in a situation whereby we have to do something about that. Because you can't operate, we cannot operate as a city where people can willfully do what they want to do. Because even though you have an exception, Mr. Streeter, what would stop Brookdale from having their carriages out there during that period of time? No one's going to enforce it.
I understand that. I do it myself. I can't speak for the other carriage
Right.
companies. I try to do the right thing. I know where we're supposed to be. I cannot defend and I can't,
Right.
you know,
Because
prosecute them either for what they're doing.
we can't
try to be
prosecute
out there.
anybody right now.
No,
if
we
they
can't.
do
And
something.
so
And that's just, that's,
that's where I would love the BPS to come back in.
Right.
Or if you want the police to write us tickets, that would detour anybody get out.
say again, Mr. Kirk.
I mean, we're not sure that the MTC had the authority to issue the citations. That's why, honestly.
But isn't there a police officer that wrote the, or was this an MTC person?
MTC.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if a police officer wrote it, then you guys would agree that it's a valid ticket?
Yes. Yeah, but I think then you're talking about city ordinance and all that.
And then it would have to be on the books as a city ordinance violation?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's where you run into
Right.
that's where you run into a problem because the carriage driver isn't necessarily required to have a motor vehicle license to
Right.
operate. You know what I mean? So that's where
Yeah,
we run
so,
into
so here's the catch-22. We could temporary ban until this lawsuit is over with. Or we can come to the table and agree on how to operate by having all stakeholders at the table, which includes members of the animal rights group, the health department, everybody who's intimately involved and who care about this situation, so that we can resolve it. It is a big problem for me to know that we can legally do nothing if a carriage driver willfully disobey the used to be rule. Boy, this sounds crazy. I mean, we're really in a catch-22 with this lawsuit, and I just feel like you're forcing the city's hands to do something, because the right thing in my mind to do would be a temporary ban, because we can't just let people be lawless. And I'm not saying I'm advocating for that, but that may be part of the discussion, because I cannot in good conscience as the chairman of Streets, Rescues, and Lighting allow people to just do what they want to do on the streets. And again, there are good people that will always follow the rules. And then there are some people that want to get over and they would disobey the rules. Go ahead, Mr. Street, and then I'm going to let you speak.
I totally get that, and why you would ban it while we're going through this, because I don't see why you would ban something. We've been trying to, or I'm going to speak for myself, they can speak. I'm trying to follow the rules that were in place, and I think everybody would, we do that. If we're going to sit there and point the lawlessness that on a Saturday night, we have 500 motorcycles riding wheelies down the sidewalks, and what do? That's more danger than the
But
horse.
Mr. Streeter, we have laws on the books right now, and the police can write a citation
That's
for
right,
that.
and I totally agree. That's true. I wish somebody, if they want to, if MTC could write us a ticket if somebody was doing something
Yeah,
wrong.
it's just the catch-22. Go ahead, because we're going to wrap this hearing up, and then we're going to.
I just wanted to, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to address Alderman Moore's suggestion earlier that we get together as a group of companies and actually do a set of regulations. I'm also a licensed attorney in the state of Missouri, and I'd be happy to sit down with the other three companies and get a combination of the MTC and the Health Department's rules into a Board of Public Safety format as a starting point.
But it would have to be all the stakeholders. It would be someone, my recommendation would be someone from the animal rights group, someone from
The animal
every
rights group
entity.
is going to be very difficult to work with. As I said, it would be like having a vegetarian in charge of a meat
No,
industry.
I disagree. The problem is when we do business the way we've always done it, we're going to get the same results. And because we don't listen to one another, then you automatically assume that we'll never get anything done. But when you can have people in the room and you can have a good mediator that gives everybody a chance to be heard, see, that's what's missing. Some people are not being heard, okay? Then we can move forward and we can make good stuff happen. So I'm not going to be discouraged that some people are perceived to be extreme this way or that way, because when you say this group of people is extreme, they'll say you're extreme as well. And so who's right? Right? So my recommendation is going to be, Alderman Vaccaro, is that I don't know when we're going to do it. We'll talk about it. But there'll be another meeting, and we won't have any public comment. But what we will have is a session just here from people who are very interested in making things better.
Can I just ask which, is it a city animal rights group?
It's where people who have signed up, given, Dan.
The county?
Like Mr. Icody, like him. and maybe one other person. Now, we're not gonna have the whole group. No, we can't manage, that'd be too much. But we will have people who have experience dealing with this. A veterinarian, someone who can articulate from, the horse's point of view, the health and welfare of a horse. And then we have our health department there, and we'll talk, and Alderman Vaccaro can email everybody. You have all the email addresses? Okay, and sure. Do you want to meet next week, or can we have a break, maybe 2 weeks from now?
I just want to make sure there's, that we're not.
Right, no, we're not gonna kick the can down the road, because like I said, I'm probably in the mindset right now of doing a temporary ban, but that's kind of, real harsh right now, so I'm willing to.
A couple weeks down the road, give everybody a chance to meet.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about in a couple weeks of coming back together and really talking through some stuff where we can hopefully create a win-win.
Will it be regulated?
No, we'll be talking about how it can be regulated or should be regulated.
We have an independent veterinarian, somebody that, I don't want the city veterinarian, I want an independent veterinarian, so I think it's more fair to us and to you
Sure.
than to have somebody, and get them informed that can talk to us about this.
Sure, I would welcome that. I would welcome an independent veterinarian being part of the process.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. You can come to the microphone.
Hi, my name is Shannon Nicholas, and I'm co-owner of Claddagh Carriage Company, and also I'm actually a driver out there. I'm an animal lover too, okay? I think that's the one thing that everybody here can agree on, okay? We're all animal lovers. It's important that we have people that are knowledgeable about equines, that have the scientific facts, that have the veterinary experience. But when you have animal rights people yelling at you, cursing at you from across the street, I'm very willing, and I'm sure everybody else would be willing to talk to these people too, if they would talk to us. I had a situation about a month ago in front of Calico's restaurant.
Okay, I don't mean to cut you off, but we're past all of that. What I want to do is focus on where do we go from here, and having a representative from each group, I think would be helpful, and we're not, and I'll
Definitely
be
helpful.
part of the discussion, so I'm not for a whole bunch of screaming and hollering at people. That's
agree.
counterproductive. So,
Well, long story short, by the end of that, I was willing to talk, and they,
got you.
we shook hands
Okay.
and went on.
He's the co-owner. He said. Go ahead, Dave.
Thank you. I would just like to respond to a couple. First, with the 4 to 6 rule, by the
No,
riverfront.
no, we're not
Okay.
gonna go back. We're not gonna go back to anything.
Well, then we can go to the meeting. I think that a temporary ban is in order. I've been with Mr. Garrettson, who was
Okay, in a
was
couple
here.
weeks, we're gonna come back together, and we're gonna hash out some stuff and try to find a win-win. There are options, okay? Let's look for the win-win, all right? And I'm gonna consider the Streets Referendum Lighting Committee adjourned for the day.
Thank you.